Welcome everyone to the 2022 Public Policy Workshop hosted by the Kansas Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Advocacy team. We are so excited that so many of you have joined us today and are able to attend live, or that you are joining us later on the recording. We have a great set of speakers lined up today to learn more about policy and advocacy, and we will be ending with our charcuterie board demo. To begin, we want to review a couple pieces of housekeeping and then introduce the members of the advocacy team and provide updates on what we have been working on this year. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentations. When it is time for questions, you can either unmute yourself, ask your questions in the chat box, or send your questions directly to myself, Becky Parshall, or Diane Greenleaf-Kisner in the chat box. 3 CEUs have been approved for this workshop through KDADS, and we are waiting for approval from CDR. Once we have received approval from CDR, the certificates will be sent by email, and we won't be sorting out who's a student and who is a dietitian, so everyone will receive the certificates. Once those have been sent out, Becky will resubmit for approval for the recording, and once those have been approved, the recording will be uploaded to YouTube if you would like to rewatch it. I do want to mention that during the break between our first 2 speakers, so before Jeanine Phillips speaks, we will ask you to take your cheese out of the refrigerator so that it will be at room temp in time for the charcuterie board demo. And now I would like to introduce the members of the advocacy team. So my name is Casey Flory, and I am the public policy coordinator. And this is my first year on the advocacy team. I have a master's degree in food policy and nutrition, which made me interested in joining the team. And while I have a strong theoretical background in policy and advocacy, I don't have a strong practical application, which is why I'm looking forward to learning more today. This year, I've worked on building a relationship with Kansas Action for Children, a group that shares many similar interests as KSAND. We will be learning more about them from our first set of speakers. In January, I attended the Academy's virtual advocacy summit, and while the Academy's public policy priorities include disease prevention and treatment, life cycle nutrition, healthy food systems and access, quality healthcare, and health equity, their current focuses are on the M&T Act and child nutrition. The summit also includes a day on the Hill, which was virtual this year instead of in DC, to set up time to meet with each state senators to advocate for the Academy's nutrition priorities. I'm hoping next year we have a few more people interested in joining us so that we can have a great discussion with our senators. If the M&T Act passes, practitioners would receive more opportunities for reimbursement while also addressing the gap in care for seniors in the United States who only have access to M&T for diabetes and renal disease, a crucial step needed to achieve health equity for racial and ethnic minority populations. The priorities for child nutrition include expansion of community eligibility, increased money for infrastructure and equipment, and to strengthen the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. Diane serves as the state policy representative and is in her first year on the team. There are currently a couple bills of interest introduced in the State House. Known as the Axe the Food Tax Bill, there have been a couple bills introduced to reduce food sales tax from 6.5% to 0%, helping Kansans save money. We will be hearing updates on the bill from our speakers from Kansas Action for Children. House Bill 2544 was recently introduced that is looking to add persons credentialed in nutrition as an exemption in the RD licensure statute. This is a bill of high concern for KSAND, and members of the advocacy team and leadership on the board are meeting with members of the Academy's Policy Initiative and Advocacy Office to learn more tomorrow morning. Anna Binder-McCasey and Jordan Chen are co-chairs in the Nutrition Services Payment Specialist position. Anna has been on the team since 2015, while Jordan has been on the team for almost 1 year. They've been working with different insurance companies on how to have improved coverage and reimbursement for dietitians in the state of Kansas. Anna helped gather letters from KSAND members to expand telehealth coverage with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has been a success. And Jordan helped coordinate efforts with KSAND members and TRICARE representatives to get clarification on how to bill correctly for TRICARE reimbursement. Our state regulatory specialist and consumer protection coordinator positions are currently open. They've been covered by one person in the past years. So if you are interested in one or both of the positions, the new year term starts in June. So you can keep an eye out for emails about joining the KSAND board. However, we would love to welcome you to join our meetings earlier than June as well. Before these positions became vacant this year, one thing that was achieved was a procedure was implemented for reporting potentially harmful practices that is now available on the public side of the KSAND website. We are preparing to introduce a bill in the state to update our licensure. The current licensure laws were created in the 80s, so years before many members of the advocacy team or KSAND became dietitians, or maybe even before some of us were born. With that, we would really love to fill these positions, especially with House Bill 2544 recently introduced that was mentioned earlier. I wanted to share my contact email once again. We encourage people to get involved. You do not need to hold a seat on the advocacy team to be involved. We would love for you to come to our meetings and volunteer with activities. We are also open to having co-chairs for all our positions. I especially would love to have a co-chair position with mine, as with my current job, I'm not allowed to do any direct advocacy. And so if someone would love to contact our federal level legislatures and work with me, I would really appreciate that. And like I mentioned, we would love to have our state regulatory specialists and consumer protection coordinator positions filled as we prepare to introduce changes to our licensure. So now we will prepare for our first speakers, and I will pass it on to Diane, who will be facilitating the workshop today.
Okay, let me start. Okay, our first presentation is presented by the Kansas Action for Children. And this is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization working to make Kansas the best it can be to raise and be a child. It's based out of Topeka and focuses on early education, healthcare access, and family supports for more than 707,000 children who call Kansas their home. John Wilson is the president and CEO of KAC and is a former state lawmaker and works in the state with legislators and advocates to advance policies that support Kansas kids and families. But Vanessa Crawford Aragón is the director of network engagement, and she has a background as a community organizer and works to coordinate with community partners around the state to support shared policy goals. So let's welcome them.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having us. I'd messaged Becky this directly. The internet has gone out in the KAC office this afternoon. And so my colleague, John, is on his way to an alternate location where he will be able to present. So I apologize for that hang up, but I'm here and glad to be here. So John shall be joining us soon. We kind of had a couple goals for this presentation, and I am happy to kind of answer questions along the way if folks have them, or we can save them for the end. So the first thing that we wanted to do was give an update on some of the legislation that we know is of interest to both of our organizations, to KSAND and to KAC. We then wanted to talk more about sort of how to do legislative advocacy, how to talk to your lawmaker, the best way to engage in advocacy to be effective. And then at the end, we were hoping to actually like go through an example of planning a meeting with folks. So the first thing that I'll ask is, so I've been talking to Casey and Becky and a few other folks. I think one of your other members actually worked with us to give informational testimony to a committee earlier this year on the importance of nutrition for kids. That's what, access to food for kids. So I know that some of you all, this is something that you have done, maybe a lot, maybe a little. Do folks have, like, can I kind of get like an idea of the level of experience on policy advocacy or engagement the folks on this call already have? And it's hard because I know there's a lot of cameras off, but do folks, like either by show of hands or by the little emoji reaction, like how many folks have like gone to Topeka to talk to their lawmaker before? I'm seeing never. One, I got one thumbs up. Two. Okay, a handle. How many folks will like respond to an e-alert and like click here to send an email to your lawmaker? Like, do folks like regularly engage on that? Okay, more of those. How many folks? Okay, I appreciate that people are putting it in the chat too. I will go ahead and count the Oklahoma State Capitol as having engaged in policy advocacy. That counts too. How many folks have, hey, Becky, I just got an email. Would you mind resending the link to John's email? Great, thank you. And then how many folks have will call your lawmaker if you get an action alert, or would feel comfortable like picking up the phone and giving your lawmaker a call and letting them know what your position on something is? Like a few. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully we have people, by the time we get done having this conversation, we'll have a lot more comfort at least doing that. Great. So as I mentioned, John should be here joining it. He's going to give us the update on the food sales tax bills. They're actually, hey, he's here. Welcome. This is my colleague, John, the president of Kansas Action for Children. John, I was just about to talk about the SNAP bills, but would you like to give the update on food sales tax or?
Sure, I would be happy to. Given that I was, this is my backup location, I first want to make sure everybody can hear me and that the light is flattering on me and I look super charming and amazing. Is that okay? Great. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's flexibility. And Vanessa, I assume by now we've covered why we're here and what we're okay, great. So if it's okay, before I kind of dive into the update on 25 or on the food sales tax, I just want to let the group know that this is the work that you all do is really important to me personally. While I've never been kind of technically in the field, the first 11 years of my career I spent with a national organization called the Alliance for a Healthier Generation. And our goal was to reduce the prevalence of childhood obesity by making the places where kids spend their time healthier. And that was really transformative for me because it helped me realize that the places where we live, learn, work, and play can dramatically shape our health. They can make it easy, hard, or impossible to make healthy choices. And since then, I have been committed to seeing how policy, big P policy, like the statutes that are changed at the legislature, or little p policy, like building level policies in schools, can encourage healthier behaviors. And having been a lawmaker and now sitting on the kind of outside of the policy of the lawmaking process, I see how powerful it is when people use their voice and use their votes to influence the policymaking process. And so that's why I'm excited that Vanessa and I can share a little bit more about the process so that you feel empowered to step in and shape the policies you want to see in the State House. So that's my quick introduction. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion that we have at the end of our time together. We'll start then, I think, by talking about the food sales tax issue in Kansas. And feel free to either use emojis on the screen or nonverbals on video, just to tell me, like, are people familiar with the conversation that's happening right now with food sales tax in Kansas and the idea on the table? Yeah, I'm seeing quite a bit of head nods. Okay, and I'm seeing some ishes as well. So we'll make sure that by the time we end today, people feel confident that they can go talk about this at the next cocktail reception they go to in person 6 years from now. So let's talk about the food sales tax. The background real quick: Kansas has among the highest sales tax on food in the country. And there's an effort underway to completely eliminate the statewide sales tax on food, meaning non-prepared foods in Kansas. That would put us in alignment with the states around us. And it would, if enacted, would really help Kansans who are living on low wages and trying to make ends meet. So you're getting the most up-to-date analysis of where we are with this. And I literally just got off the phone with folks from the governor's office and on our team about this. There are right now a handful of bills before the legislature that eliminate the statewide sales tax on food in some fashion. We don't need to get into the nuances of all the differences, but there's House bills and then there's Senate bills. And there's variations across those bills. Some make the change sooner, as soon as this summer, July 1. Some make it later, and then some action as of a couple of hours ago make it really later, meaning 2024 is when one of the current bills would have the food sales tax elimination take effect. So there's a lot to track, but the key thing is that there's at least bills before the legislature that accomplish that goal. And the challenge that we have right now is that it's not a matter of political will or kind of interest in cutting the sales tax on food. The issue right now, I think, is frankly politics that is at play. This is an idea that the governor has proposed. It's also an idea that Derek Schmidt, our attorney general and candidate for governor, has also proposed. And then we have a legislature that is trying to navigate those two dynamics. And so, what is complicating things right now is some of the bills that are moving forward on the food sales tax are very, very expensive because of some tweaks that were made. And that's a concern for us. We think the policy in and of itself is something that we could afford to do if it was just that, but it seems to be bundled together with other tax changes or other ways to remove sales tax on things like restaurant food and prepared foods. And then that just really makes it much more expensive. And in the long run, it could be hard for us to be able to afford that change. And so we're really trying to take a close look at the numbers of these fast moving bills, and also having to weigh it against other changes and other legislation that's moving forward as well. Most recently, an incentive bill trying to lure new businesses to Kansas, or at least a new business to Kansas, that has a pretty significant fiscal note. So we are really just trying to process the numbers right now. But I think we can all celebrate the fact that lawmakers have made progress on bills that at least accomplish the goal of eliminating the statewide sales tax on food, but there's still a long ways to go in the process. And given how complex this is, I'm happy to answer questions about this now, or we can save it till the end. I'll pause there because I've been talking a lot.
John, I started to put it in the chat, and then I figure I'll just say it. So a fiscal note, and that's right before you got on, John, I kind of asked folks what their level of familiarity and comfort in with the legislature was. And a lot of folks haven't done very much advocacy at all. So a fiscal note, and if there's any other jargony type things like that, please somebody flag it for us. Is the official estimate for how much a policy would cost the state, or how much revenue it would bring to the state. There's some things that would bring money. There's some things that would cost money if it were to go into effect. And so there is a eliminating a sales tax on something as broad as groceries, that cost a lot of money. It has a certain fiscal note. And then sort of the more you include in that, the more it costs. And so, you know, we and other lawmakers and other advocates are looking like, just because the policy is a good policy doesn't necessarily mean that we can afford it if we put a lot of other, and what we saw this morning was that there were a lot of other totally different types of tax issues that got put on the bill that all have their own associated cost too. So.
Thanks for that, Vanessa.
Yeah. Thoughts or questions? Right up. So there's not and I know that KSAND has sent out an action alert in the past that, you know, click one of those, click here to call your, or to send an email to your lawmaker and tell them you support eliminating the food sales tax. I think that that's still a good thing to do and still relevant. But as far as like which bill, you know, because there's different versions that have sort of different things, it's not super clear. I think that everyone is trying to, you know, assess the situation. So I would say the easiest, if this was something that you really are interested in and like really care about and want to stay up to date on, I just put a link in the chat to sign up for KAC's updates. We've been putting them out on Fridays. And so that'll have what's going on with food sales tax along with the other policy priorities that we're working on. So that's a good way to stay up to date. And then when there is, you know, sort of the next action, that's the best way to stay looped in on that. Did also want to give a couple updates on, I know that these aren't bills that you all have taken an official policy position on, but are relevant to food security and access to nutritious food for Kansans. And so just wanted to let you know. So there have been a couple other bills that we have been working on related to eligibility for SNAP benefits. So one, House Bill 2525 would remove, currently Kansas has a requirement that in order for a parent to access SNAP, they have to comply with child support, like formal child support enforcement with their child's other parent. And most families do that, but for the families that don't, they frequently have very good reasons, such as if they're concerned about abuse or things like that. If there's reasons not to continue to be in contact with your child's other parent, we don't want people to have to choose between getting access to the public benefits that you should be eligible for and you know, potentially having to put your family in an unsafe situation. So House Bill 2525, it not only applies to SNAP, but also applies to child care assistance. So that bill passed out of committee earlier. Oh God, John, was that this week or last week now? I've like fully.
It's officially last week, but like 30 minutes ago feels like last week.
Yeah.
So
it's been fast and furious these past few days. And then there's another bill, House Bill 2215, that would remove, there is currently a ban on being able to receive SNAP if you have ever been convicted of a drug-related felony. And so that can be a really significant barrier to folks being able to, you know, get on their feet and you know, make ends meet, particularly after a previous conviction. And so that bill would make it easier for some families to access their SNAP benefits. And that passed out of committee this week. So that's actually really good news that hopefully we're making, you know, easier access to nutritious food for people who need it more available. So that's sort of there's also a lot of other bills that KSC is working on related to health issues and early learning and those other things, but that's sort of the food security situation.
Vanessa and John, I received a question.
Mhm.
So does the sales tax bill, does that just eliminate state tax on groceries and not city or county tax?
That's a great question. Yes. Well, yes, it does. Just the statewide sales tax. It would still leave in place the county sales tax, and there are various iterations in depending on the bill you look at that would create county options for eliminating the sales tax. But honestly, counties have the ability to do that right now. The concern would be the loss of revenue, and because right now cities and counties can only rely on property tax or sales tax to fund their operations. And so something else would have to give. And we know that there's not a lot more you can give in property taxes without really hurting people, especially those on fixed incomes. And just, I think I mentioned this earlier, elimination of the statewide sales tax on unprepared foods would save the average Kansas family about $500 a year. And could save certain folks like childcare providers even more, who buy their snacks and their meals at grocery stores for their childcare operations. So.
Great. You want to move on to the makeup of the legislature and how to engage, John?
Yeah, I would. And before I do that, because we want to make sure that we are providing like a really tailored experience for you all, I have some slides I want to share, but I would love to just get a sense of the room of folks who have talked to a lawmaker before, whether it's kind of in district or in the state house or by phone or whatever. Just nod or wave your hand if you've talked to a lawmaker before. Okay, Carol, all right, seeing you. Okay. So kind of a mixed bag. So I appreciate that. I want to say that as a former lawmaker, I represented Lawrence and rural Douglas County for a handful of years. And having been on that side, I just want to tell you that you have every right to talk to your lawmaker. You have every right to be in the state house to share your concerns and to share your experience. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be somebody with fancy credentials to be in there and to weigh in. You have to have an opinion about an issue, and that's that. And I know that sometimes that the building itself can seem intimidating. The process sure as hell can be intimidating, and it's confusing. And that's why we're here, is to help the process seem a little bit more relatable to people. But I just want you to know that I don't want you to ever feel like you don't belong in the legislative process and the policymaking process. We are a citizen legislature, and if your elected official chooses not to hear from you or chooses not to respond to you, that's a problem. And so we're gonna share with you some ideas that we've gained in our experience of ways we think are helpful to talk with lawmakers, ways to get your ideas before them, and then kind of what to expect with the process. So before we talk about that process, I just want to provide some context on the legislature itself, so you can get a sense of who's in the building. And so I'm going to share some slides real quick, and it looks like I can do that fairly easily. So 1 second. Okay. Can you see a slide that has our state motto on it?
Yes. Wonderful.
All right. So let's look at the Kansas legislature. So as a reminder, we have the House and the Senate make up the Kansas legislature, and then we have the governor, who's a part of the process as well, and then of course the Supreme Court is a part of our government as well. But we're going to focus on the legislature today. So I wanted to just kind of give you a sense of the political makeup of the legislature, and we're not here to pick sides or anything, but we want to just give you this information. In Kansas, Republicans control the House and the Senate, and it's not as simple though as you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. There are variations of Republicans and Democrats, but generally speaking, you'll hear about conservative Republicans and moderate Republicans, and then you'll hear about kind of liberal Democrats and moderate Democrats. And so while the numbers, if you look at this slide, you see that the Republicans have a clear majority in the House. Depending on the issue, that doesn't mean that everybody always votes together. So I think it's important to understand the variations within each party. So looking at the Kansas House, you'll see that currently there are, I think it's 85 Republicans and 40 Democrats. If you see this gray line through the middle, that's the number of votes that are needed to pass a bill in the House. So you need 63 yes votes to pass a bill. And then that light blue line are the number of votes needed to override the veto of the governor or to pass a constitutional amendment. So you can see, and this has already played out this week, that Republicans do have the numbers to override a veto or to pass a constitutional amendment if they all stick together. And that happened this week as they were voting to override the governor's veto on congressional maps as a part of redistricting. If we go over to the Senate, there are fewer senators. So there are 125 House members and there are 40 senators in Kansas. So a similar way to read this chart here. There are actually now 11 Democrats. This hasn't been updated, I think, since the most recent election. There are 11 Democrats, and then the rest of the Senate are Republicans. And there are not a lot of moderate Republicans in the Kansas Senate right now. After the last elections, both chambers became more conservative, even though there wasn't really a huge shift in the partisan makeup. And you can see here also that Republicans have the votes to override any veto or to pass a constitutional amendment. And you'll see that it takes 21 votes to pass something in the Kansas Senate. Important to know this year, as you get more involved in the legislature, that all 125 House members are up for election this year in November, as are statewide offices like the governor, like the state treasurer, attorney general, and so on. Senators are not up for a re-election for another 2 years. So that's the makeup of the legislature. Just for funsies, I wanted to show you some trends in Kansas. You'll see that we've had this trend of 2 terms of a Republican governor, 2 terms of a Democratic governor, and back and forth. And then you can see that for most of recent history, Republicans have controlled both chambers in the legislature as well as the governor's office. So that's your civics lesson right now on the Kansas legislature and its current political makeup.
Great, thanks, John. So are we ready to get into sort of, now I have an issue and I want to bring it to my lawmaker and I want to know how to do that? Okay, great. So I have, and I'll say, I've worked on different types of policy issues over the course of my career on different things. And some of them are tougher and some of them are, like this, I like to think like we're advocating, I'm at KAC, like one of my main things is I think kids should have enough food to eat, like I think that should be like a pretty like bipartisan issue. People can have different thoughts about the best way to make sure that happens. But I think that it's, regardless of who your lawmaker is, what their party affiliation is, what your party affiliation is, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to talk to your lawmaker and have them be receptive, even if not on every single thing that you think is important, on a specific issue. So if I know that KSAND has, there's the food sales tax. If there's ever like food access issues, and I know that you also have some like professional things that you're working, things more related to your profession. And so I think that there's lots of opportunity. And so wanted to just go through like some of my like best pointers on how to communicate with your lawmaker to sort of like demystify the process a little bit. Kansas is sort of an interesting place where leadership staff, lawmakers who are in leadership, and it is possible that like your own state representative or your own senator has been elected into leadership within the body, but most of us aren't. Most of them are they're just rank and file folks, right? Leadership has staff, like they'll have folks that they can talk to who are experts on policy, who might be really up to date on the latest thing about the bill that you care about. Most lawmakers have somebody an assistant that they're working with to like help manage like administrative issues. They do not have staff that are helping them manage policy issues or bills, which means that you get to talk directly to your own lawmaker. You don't have to like go through intermediaries. You can feel, and it's, as John mentioned, it's their job to talk to you. And they frequently, like they expect to hear from their constituents, particularly about issues that they're expert on. So you should always feel comfortable reaching out to your lawmaker. You should always feel like they should want to hear from you. So understanding that they're going to have limited time, because as we mentioned, most of them don't have staff that are like managing a lot of stuff for them. They're on multiple committees that have a very set schedule. They are the House and the Senate have their own meeting schedules that the lawmaker themselves doesn't get to control. So I heard John kind of described it to me one time as kind of like college, where like you have a class schedule, like you have. And so that's why it's really important to be mindful of time. If you have an appointment, to be on time to your appointment, or to be really clear about how much time the lawmaker has to give. If you are scheduling something like a video call, now in COVID times, something like that, just being mindful that you are going to have a limited amount of time with your lawmaker, and that's fine. They're not necessarily like brushing you off because they say, I only have 10 minutes. It's great if you have 10 minutes. So just being mindful of time, being ready to be flexible. If you go to Topeka to meet with folks, a lot of lawmakers actually share an office with another lawmaker. And so being flexible in, sure, we can have this conversation while there are also other people here, or we might be better off going out into the hallway, or we might be better off walking with you to the next meeting. All of that is still a really good opportunity to talk to your lawmaker. All of that, I think that sometimes people feel a little, or could feel discouraged if they aren't expecting to have a limited amount of time or other things happening. But so I think if you can sort of prepare yourself that that's going to be the likely situation. And so that's just sort of the like table setting, like what it might be like to reach out to your lawmaker. When you're advocating for any particular issue, so if it's food sales tax, if it's other food security, if it's something related to professional licensure or whatever you're working on, I think it's really important for the lawmaker to understand why you are talking to them, and to help them remember, sort of like what this interaction was. So if you have any type of personal connection, like it really helps to do some research ahead of time, find out what every lawmaker had a job before they were elected. They were a doctor, or they were a farmer, or they were a lawyer, or they were an insurance salesman, or they were, like everybody. I just named, there's a lot of lawmakers that are one of those jobs. But they, so knowing something about them, a lot of them will list, sort of where they go to church, or where their kids go to school, or professional associations that they're part of. Doing that research on them ahead of time so that you can say, oh, I saw that, your kids went to this school, my kids go to this school. Or, my mom is a member of that congregation, or what, just like things that can tie them back to you. And then explaining why you are the person that is there talking to them. And so it's really important. So saying all of that, like, hi, I'm Vanessa, I'm with KAC. I think that, you know, we have this in common, or I know that we, you know, share this experience. And I'm here today to talk to you about the food sales tax and eliminating the food sales tax, because again, they have a really short period of time. And so getting to their bottom line really quickly, I think is very valuable. So you shouldn't assume that a lawmaker knows anything about what you're talking to them about. You shouldn't assume that they have already read the bill, particularly if they're like not on the committee that has handled the bill or something like that. The likelihood that you will be the first person talking to them about this, you can just go ahead and assume that. And so being both brief and giving the relevant information quickly. So the reason that we support the eliminating the food sales tax is because it will make food more affordable for low-income families and give people better access to healthy food, right? Like that's a pretty quick, and then listen and find out what their concerns are, find out what their position is. A lot of lobbying is listening. If you go and just sort of unload a whole spiel and you never hear back from them, then that's kind of a lost opportunity. One thing that I always like to point out to folks is just because a lawmaker is polite or friendly doesn't mean that they agree with you. And so it is okay and expected to say, what is your position on this issue? How are you going to vote? And sometimes people feel like that's like too direct or potentially rude. As long as you are being professional and polite and you know, kind in your interaction, it is expected. And lawmakers, it's their job to have a position on things. And so it is fair and expected for you to ask them directly. And so, yeah, listening as much as you are sharing, asking questions about sort of what their concerns are, answering questions where you have the ability to. A couple really, like, hopefully you're having like a really good exchange with those lawmakers. A flag is you shouldn't argue. You know, if someone says like, no, I don't want to do that because I think it's a terrible idea, and that's, say, okay, thank you for your time, have a great day. As long as they know what your position was, it doesn't help to argue. It might hurt. So don't argue. If sometimes, particularly because you are now being looked at as an expert on this policy that you have brought to them, you know, and you are an expert, that's why you're talking to them. And even if the expertise is in your own experience, and you know, this is what this would mean for me, this is what this would mean for my family, this is what this would mean for the clients that I work with. And so they can ask you questions, and that's really good. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. Tell them you don't know the answer. Don't make it up. And that's because I think that's like, sometimes folks don't want to feel like they don't know, or, you know, that it feels like I shouldn't tell you either an answer that you won't like or an answer that I don't know. And so it is fine to say, I actually don't know that, but I can put you in touch with some people who will, or I can find that out and get back to you and come up with a plan. It is better to say that you don't know than to try to fake it. And then I think it's always really important to follow up any interaction, you know, like a thank you for your time. I know that when I used to work for a lawmaker, we always used to really like getting like a little thank you note that said like, thank you, and saying like, and I really appreciated hearing about your position on eliminating the food sales tax, or whatever the issue that you're there to talk to them about is. So that way that helps stick that interaction in their mind again. Because remember, you are one of maybe a lot of people they're going to hear from that day, talking about one bill among a lot of things that they're going to hear about. And so whatever you can do to kind of make that sticky for them so that they can remember, I talked to Becky and she was so lovely and she had so much information. And now when I am worried about, or when I am, have a question about what this would mean, I know that my constituent Becky is somebody that I can talk to about that, right? Like, I think that whatever you can do to sort of make that stick for them. And then also, particularly, like, you're all here because you are part of the academy, you're all part of this association. If you have a conversation with your lawmaker, you should tell somebody, you should bring that back to KSAND, you should bring that back to whoever you're doing your advocacy with, because that might be really useful information. Like, he told me he's going to vote yes, or well, they actually have a lot of concerns. You can get a lot of really useful information from these one-on-one conversations or from these small group conversations. And so bringing that back to the group that you're working with, so that somebody can do something with that information and it doesn't just stay in your mind and not go anywhere else, So I think that those are the two great, the follow up with the lawmaker and follow up with whatever organization you're working with. John, you were a lawmaker for a long time. Did I?
Yeah, that tracks with me. And I think I especially like the listening part and the being comfortable with calling the question, where do you stand on this issue or whatever. I think it is tough to do that, but it's such an important thing to do. A couple more things I would just pepper in there to manage everyone's expectations for when you do go visit with a lawmaker is they are in Topeka at the State House roughly from January until May, June, depending on if they have their act together, and most of the time take an April recess. This year, it's almost the entire month of April. They're not going to be in Topeka. So that's when the legislative session happens. And when they're not in session, they're back in their hometowns, typically doing their regular jobs if they're still working, and ideally still responding to emails and other things, or having coffee and conversation types things, or eggs and issues, or whatever it might be. So I think it's important to know that, because similar, I think, to modern day advertising, if all you did was one 30-second commercial or one single meeting with a lawmaker and didn't follow it up with a thank you email, or go to their town hall one time and say, you remember we talked about the food sales tax in your office? I'm the one that brought you the fresh fruits and vegetables, whatever it might be, whatever little leave behind you might have. I think that's really critical, to not just think it's one shot to do something. In the same way that we tell people, providing testimony is not the be all end all to getting a bill passed. It's a step on a process. And if the only time lawmakers or a committee hear from you is during that testimony piece, you're missing a real opportunity for education and then follow up and follow through. A couple more things related to this idea that this legislature is like college. Depending on the day, it feels like high school or elementary school too. But so the House and Senate have the schedule, as Vanessa pointed out. And to give you a sense of the House schedule, most people are on 2-3 committees. So that's 9:30 in the morning. And then they go on the House floor at 11, and then they have a lunch break, and then it's a 1:30 committee, and then it's a 3:30 committee. So you see, there's not a lot of time in between. And so that's why those 10-15 minutes meetings are squeezed in throughout there. And they typically start their day at about 8:30 with caucus related meetings. We didn't touch much also on the actual legislative process. I don't want to get into schoolhouse rocks necessarily, but want to let you know that you might read in the news a bill has passed out of committee, or lawmakers introduced a bill to do this. And I want you to know it is a long process. And frankly, the legislative process is designed to kill ideas. It's designed to be really hard to get laws changed. I think rightly so. You don't want to make it easy to change laws. So the way the process typically plays out, let's just say it's in the House, because there's two sides to the legislature. A bill is introduced by either a lawmaker or a committee, and then it's referred to the relevant committee. And at that point, the committee chair can choose to have a hearing on a bill, meaning people come to tell you yes or no, like why it's good or why it's bad. And then that could be it. Or then they could say, now I want to vote on that bill. And then the lawmakers vote on it, amend it, do whatever, and it potentially leaves the committee. And at that point, the leaders of each chamber can decide whether or not they want that bill to be heard on the floor. So heard on the House floor by all 125 members, or on the Senate floor by all 40 members. And if that passes the floor, then that's when it then goes to the other side and goes to the whole process again. Goes to a committee. Committee decides to have a hearing or not. Committee decides to vote on it or not. Goes to the floor, and that floor decides to vote on it. So there's a lot of steps in the process where it could go nowhere. And so I think it's really helpful to understand that. So you don't get your hopes up like we got a bill hearing, because that could be the end of the line if the leadership of that committee or of the chamber doesn't want to see it move forward. So we should really celebrate when things get out of a committee. Like that's a big deal in and of itself. Again, we see that as kind of our role in this, is following the process so that you don't have to get into the weeds of where things are. But that's why we try to provide timely updates of the right time for you to use your voice and use your network to put pressure on lawmakers.
Yeah, and to the point that sometimes it takes multiple sessions to get something done. Sometimes it might take a few years. This year we got a bill introduced. Next year we'll get a bill hearing. The year after that we'll get it passed out of committee, right? Like sometimes it takes that long. HB 2525, the bill that I was telling you about child support cooperation and SNAP eligibility. That bill is one that we have been working on for several years, right? That there's a lot of partners that are working on for several years. And so that thing about developing a relationship with your lawmaker, or at least having your lawmaker kind of like know who you are and why you care about this and why you keep bringing that to them, that will only help as that moves along, so they're like, we had a conversation, like this was an issue last year, and this is the concern that I had. And you can say, yes, and this is why you shouldn't be concerned about that. That's knowing that this ideally isn't a one-off conversation, but one that you're going to have over time. I actually thought of another good tip that I should have mentioned when I was talking about preparing for talking to your lawmaker. They almost never have time to read a big anything. So if you have like a big report or like a bit, like we did, there is a study that says what this is, they don't have the time to read it. They're not going to read it. And so if you have the opportunity to create a one-pager or a fact sheet or something like that, that has sort of like the top line information, that is going to be the most accessible. And so that would be the same if you were handing a physical piece of paper to someone in person, if you were sending someone an email, if you were doing a phone call. That is always my recommendation. And being able to say, there is a study, I can show you the study, or, I can give you this big report that someone has done, but giving them the information so that way they don't have to go find it for themselves. And you have, again, just established yourself as someone who knows a lot about this issue that they have to address because it's being brought to them as a lawmaker.
Vanessa, that's a really great point, and I want to underscore that trust is one of the most valuable things in the State House, and establishing yourself as somebody your lawmaker can trust is really important. But they also trust a lot of other people in the process. So, as an example, in a committee, there's a chair, a vice chair, and a ranking member. The ranking member is from the minority party. And when a bill passes out of committee, generally the chair or vice chair of that committee kind of writes up the summary of the bill, kind of like the Cliff's Notes or the Sparks Notes for the bill. And then when they know it's going to be heard by the full chamber, then they present the bill brief to their caucus, to the other members of their party. And they say, here's what it does. Here's who was for it. Here's who was against it. I think it's a good bill. I think you should vote for it. And that's generally how most of the body makes their decision is, I trust John. John told me the truth of the bill brief. I like the people that showed up to support the bill, so I'm going to support it unless, unless something comes up. Or there's the cases where leadership says you're going to support this bill or else. And that's the type of arm twisting that gives politics a bad name.
So, okay, I'm looking at how much time. So John, let's you and I make a decision. So we said that we can sort of walk through, like we can get a volunteer and look at someone's lawmaker and maybe come up with a plan. We also could just go ahead and start taking questions. So I could, Casey or Becky or whoever else, what is your preference too? Because I want to make sure that you stay on time.
I haven't seen a lot of questions in the chat, so I think walking through an example might be beneficial, and then if anything comes up, we can make sure to ask those.
Great.
Yeah. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So Vanessa, I think here's what we can do. I want to. We'll use an example from somebody from the group to find a lawmaker, and then we'll use that as the way to walk through the legislative website, which is a really helpful tool to find information about bills, lawmakers, where things are in the process. So I don't know how to select somebody.
I was going to say, does someone want to look up their lawmaker and use them as an example? Any of the board folks could do that. Or I'm also, Carol, I've been watching you. You said that you've engaged in advocacy, maybe more than some of the other folks in the group. I don't know if you already know who your lawmaker is.
My senator is Marcy Francisco, because I'm in Lawrence. But and I talk to Mike Amix all the time when he's down in the barber shop. So, I'm familiar with Lawrence. So is there a legislator that is spearheading one of the sales tax bills that you support? It's got good wording.
Yeah, that's a good question, Carol. Right now, the governor's office is really behind two of the bills, one House, one Senate. And then I know the chair of Senate Tax and the chair of House Tax also introduced bills. Their committee bills are not sponsored by individuals. So let's do Adam Smith, the chair of the House Tax Committee. But just to orient you all, if you can see my screen here, when you go to the legislative website, on the left navigation bar, you'll see Find Your Legislator, and you can do it by your address. And this takes you to a separate website, and you put in your address, and it'll tell you your lawmaker. But let's just skip that process, and we'll go up here to the top navigation bar. A couple of things that I think are really helpful to know about before we start diving into to Adam Smith. At the top here, thanks in large part due to pandemic related federal dollars, now every committee room in the House and Senate, and plus the chamber floors, have audio and video capabilities so that people can watch live streams of committees. So you can go to this audio video tab at the top and select it. I like to go down to this bottom one because it takes me to the YouTube channel where you could see, where you can kind of sign up to follow a particular committee, and then also just see what's happening live. So it's a nice way to just listen in on things. But most committees now also have a way to participate in legislative testimony remotely. And it's a little, we don't have the time to go in the details of how that happens, but generally you reach out to the committee assistant to learn about how to get on the schedule to testify on a bill. But let's go to this list up here. And we know we wanted to talk about Adam Smith, the chair of the House Tax Committee. So what I'm going to do is go to the House roster, and you'll see this whole list of 125 state representatives. And I'm going to go down to the bottom here to look at Representative A. Smith, Adam Smith. And you'll see a lot of things are hyperlinked in here. So his name is hyperlinked. I'm going to click on that. And we get kind of his Facebook page, if you will, on the legislative website, where we get a picture. Sometimes it's a really recent picture of folks. Sometimes they haven't changed it since when they were elected in 1992. So be on the lookout. And so this page has so many helpful things at a glance. You can see the committees that he sits on, as well as the committees that he is in leadership on. As we mentioned, he's the chair of tax, and he's also the vice chair of the special committee on tax. And again, this is linkable. So if I was to click this right now, it would actually take me to the page on the tax committee. Again, with lots more helpful information. I can easily click to the live audio stream. I can see the agenda and minutes. Agenda is the plan ahead, and minutes are what has already happened. You can see testimony related to bills. And then in this section, you'll see bills, resolutions, appointments, bills in committee. Those are bills that are available for that committee to work, to have hearings on and to vote on after they've had hearings. And then you'll see at the bottom bills that have been sponsored by the committee, meaning there's not a single person that is the bill sponsor, it's just coming from a committee. And so you'll see in this list, SB and HB. HB is House bills. House bills will always have 4 digits, and Senate bills start with 1 digit and can go up to 3 digits. And it just has to do with when during the session they were introduced. So the nice thing about this page, again, is you get all the access to information about the committee itself, including chair, vice chair, and then you can see the members of these committees along with the legislative staff that support it. What's interesting now is we could, is from here, if there's a bill that you're curious about, and now I'm just blanking off the top of my head, the House bills that are there for the sales tax, it is
2484.
Yeah, 2484. So I'm going to click on 2484. And then when you do that, what you'll see is bill versions. This first thing is a PDF of the actual bill. And so if you're a little bored and you want to read the whole bill, this is what a bill looks like. So somebody's like, I've never read the bill or I haven't seen the bill, and they're talking about this thing here. Most of the time, the bill, the substantive things are just things that are in italic because they are additions to something. So a lot of the text that I'm scrolling through actually isn't new language. It's part of existing statutes. The bills, the substance comes in either additions or deletions to the statutes. So there's the whole bill here, and this is 20 pages. So if you're wondering how do you eliminate the sales tax on food, the state sales tax on food, you do it in a 20-page bill like this. But that's a lot for a lot of people to understand. So the legislature helpfully does other things. They create bill summaries. Since this one hasn't had any action done on it, they don't have a bill summary, but it's kind of the plain English description of a bill. It summarizes it. And then you'll see, as we talked about earlier, the fiscal note. So every bill gets a fiscal note that's developed by the Division of Budget in the governor's office, and they say how much it's going to cost and what are the considerations when it comes to cost. So that's generally how this website works. There's a couple more things that I wanted to show you. If I go back to the House roster, we're going to go to Adam Smith right here. On this right-hand column, you'll see his official State House email address. You'll also see his personal email address. You'll see his personal information if he chooses to disclose it, information about a spouse and how long they've been in office. That's generally very helpful. And so, as Vanessa mentioned, when you call most lawmakers, they have a committee, or they have an office assistant who keeps calendar and answers phone calls. So that's what you'll get when you call this number here. The 296 number is usually their office assistant. One more piece of helpful thing on this page is if you click on map under the district, you'll see a map of the representative or the senator's district to see what communities are included in that, which I find helpful when I'm trying to figure out, like, do I have any champions in this area? What cities can I pull from? there's a lot to take in here, but I would just encourage kind of clicking around on things. You'll be surprised at how, the rabbit holes you can go down by seeing all the linkages to things. But I'd love to pause here to answer any questions about this tool itself, and then we can open up to any other broader questions.
Yeah, Carol made a good point in the chat too about you can search by a bill number. You can also search by keywords. I think it's really important to like sort of be creative with your keyword. Like if you think that if you're trying to check on different things, like they might not call it exactly what you call it. And so, you know, try several different options for that. I was going to say, and that's like John said, knowing things like what your lawmaker does for a living when they're not a lawmaker, knowing things about what else is going on in their district, you know, being able to look and see who, you know, what the you know, towns or counties that they represent are, if you knowing, you know, are there other issues going on that they might be interested in or might be more preoccupied with, like just knowing that kind of background before you go into that conversation.
Yeah.
And all that is available just on the website.
Vanessa, this isn't prompted by a question, but I thought of one more thing that I know I was super surprised at when I first started getting into state government, is when I was campaigning, I was like, I'm not an attorney. My background, my education is in graphic design. I was like, I don't know how to write a bill. So like, I'm probably disqualified. I probably shouldn't even run for office. And I'm here to tell you all that that when lawmakers say, well, I wrote a bill to allow kids to eat candy bars at every meal, they didn't write a bill. There's a whole office full of attorneys who understand Kansas statutes, and they take the lawmaker's idea and they figure out how to turn it into a bill. And the lawmaker's like, yep, that sounds good. And then they introduce the bill. It's not quite as simple as that, but they have the attorneys that work for them and that craft everything. So that's called the Office of the Reviser of Statutes. So when you hear revisor's office, that's just attorneys. And then on the other side of the building, literally the other side of the building in the basement, is the Office of Legislative Research, or the Legislative Research Department. Those are nonpartisan staff who can do the in-depth research on issues. And every committee has a couple of attorneys from the revisor's office and a couple of researchers from the Department of Research to support lawmakers and things. So a lawmaker might say, I'm curious to know food insecurity numbers for my district. The Legislative Research Department can pull that for them. So as Vanessa mentioned earlier in the session, or in our workshop, most lawmakers don't have staff, but they can have access to this kind of pool of nonpartisan researchers. I thought that was fascinating personally, like, because I was assuming you had to be an attorney to be able to craft bills.
No, and that goes back to the like, everyone deserves to be able to talk to their lawmaker. Also, like, anybody can be a lawmaker. Like, lawmakers are regular people. And so, like, you should never be worried about reaching out to them. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is certainly not a part of my responsibilities as the president of KSAND Action for Children, but I would say if any of you all are interested in running for office, regardless of political affiliation, I'd be happy to answer questions for you. We need all kinds of diverse experiences represented in the legislature. And so if you are ever curious about it, you can certainly reach out to me. And if I can't answer questions for you, or if you need to know how to get plugged into something, let me know. This is my email address too. I'm putting in the.
I have a couple questions. So I know at the federal law with proposed bills, when they're trying to get people from like the other party to sign on, things get added on a lot, and you have this bill that gets pieced together. Does that happen at the state too?
Yes. So yes, it does. We don't need to get into wonky budget policy, but one of the key differences between federal and state government is the federal government can deficit spend more than they bring in through taxes. In Kansas, you can't do that. We have to have a balanced budget every year. So you'll see on both the Senate and House have rules. It's called pay-go, meaning if you're adding an amendment on the floor of either chamber, you have to come up with a way to pay for it or make it revenue neutral. But there's in the legislative process, as we talked about earlier, the House hears something and then it has to pass the House and then go to the Senate, and the Senate hears that bill. And if the Senate makes any changes or vice versa, if the opposite chamber makes any changes to something, they do what they call a conference committee. And that's where 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate get together to work out those differences. And that's where you see the things that you're talking about, Casey, most often is somebody says, well, we'll let you keep this change, but you need to put in Senate Bill 385. And then we also need to add this text from Senate Bill 2, and then you can keep whatever you want. That's where so they call that bundling. I like to think of it like bundling at a cable company where they're putting phone and internet and other things together, and you don't want everything in that bundle necessarily. The challenge becomes once they've bundled together something, that changes from what I would call a regular bill to a conference committee report. And at that point, a conference committee report can only have a yes or no vote. It cannot be amended on the floor. And that becomes challenging when you might have 4 really good things in the conference committee report and 1 thing that you really don't like. If that 1 thing is something you really don't like and is strong enough that you're going to vote no against it, that then becomes political, I'm just say ammunition for people to say, can you believe that John voted against this bill that included all these things? So yes, Casey, that's the long answer to your question of it does happen. It happens in that form, and it happens with amendments in the committee process as well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that we can answer? This was a lot of information, folks.
And I would love, was anybody surprised by something or alarmed by something?
I'm surprised there's a graphic designer in representation. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's really helpful because I have a feeling that a lot of our attendees today are students. And so I think it's important to get people involved early and to not feel intimidated by it, because then there's just such an opportunity to affect greater change over the course of their career. So I think just getting this basic start on what it is and what it looks like and how to do it and to not be intimidated by it is really important. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah, I want to second what Becky said. Even I'm actually the president of KSAND. Advocacy is not something I'm super familiar with, and this made it much more approachable of, okay, even to know 10 minutes is not an insult to my, what I know, that's what's to be expected versus, a normal, I would picture a sit down meeting, but to go, oh no, you just met walking from this to this, that's typical, would make me feel more comfortable than something I wouldn't have thought of before.
Good.
Thanks, Morgan.
There's a question in the chat about what is a substitute bill.
Yeah, this is like 201 stuff here being put on the spot. So the substitute bill is when there are enough changes to a bill that, I mean, it's kind of like when you have a Word document and you've had 7 people add comments and track changes, it just becomes too much to deal with. So you create a substitute bill that is just largely new text, and so you move forward with that. That's the reason for that. And I think the cousin of that is a gut and go is a term you would hear where they have a bill in committee that does one thing, and they say, well, we need, they call it a shell, but they need the shell of that bill, the bill number, in order to get something through in time, or to not have to have the House vote on something yet or the Senate vote on something. So they just got the entire contents of a bill and amend in the entire contents of another bill. And so that's how you'll see things that might be a bill about alcohol turn into a bill about property taxes, is they just need a shell to put the content in based on the timing of the legislative session. It's really weird. And I wish there was a better way, but that's part of it's a self-governing body, so they set their own rules. And then related to the why is tax being eliminated on candy and soda? It has to do with what's known as the streamlined sales tax agreement. And so most states participate in streamlined sales tax. It's basically a common set of rules that say, here's the definition for food. Here's the definition for cars. Here's the definition for streaming internet services. Everybody abides by those definitions. And so, and that allows for kind of apples to apples comparisons across states. So if we came up with a different definition for food, then we would be out of compliance with the streamlined sales tax agreement. Then you get into other issues like, we've heard this from our friends in the Mars candy, that if M&Ms count as candy because there's no flour in them, but Twix count as food because there's flour in the cookie part of Twix. So it gets really complicated. And I know that sometimes conflicts with our desire to promote healthier behaviors by having tax policy promote healthier food options. It's complicated, I guess is the best way to summarize it. Does that answer your question, Carol?
I did want to jump onto the idea that, like, so with substitutes and gut and go, like, a bill can change a lot from the beginning to the end. And so that's what, like, being connected to an organization you trust to, like, keep you updated is important, because what you thought was the case in the beginning might not be the case by the time the bill becomes law. And if you have developed an okay relationship with your lawmaker, and you can call them up and say, like, hey, I don't know if you realized, but there is this provision that you probably don't like, I don't like, that has made it into this bill now. Sometimes that's how lawmakers find out about those things, because someone that they trust contacts them and tells them that. Because when things are happening really quickly and lots of changes are happening to lots of bills, if you already know that that's something that they care about and you can contact them, that's always a really good opportunity. So. Yeah.
I'm going to put in one more pitch, and I know we're over time. I was once at a conference and somebody talked about Twitter, your Twitter feed being like the bar that you hang out with, because you kind of curate your friends that you want to be around. And she said health policy Twitter was her favorite thing, and she's got a good group there. There is a hashtag KSLeg, so KSLEG, that is used on Twitter for folks following the State House. So if you use Twitter and want to follow along with State House happenings, I'd recommend that. It's what a lot of lawmakers use to follow what's happening in the building in real time. Yet again, another way that the legislature is like high school. When you actually watch video of the House floor, you'll see so many people just on their phones, scrolling through Twitter or doing other things. And so it's a good way to follow along with what's happening in real time.
Okay, let's thank our speakers. That was really a lot of good information that we can all use, and maybe make it easier to contact some of our legislatures and stuff. So, and John gave you the contact number if you need to contact him. Vanessa, if you want to put yours in there too, we can contact you. So we're going to just take a few-minute break so we can get set up for the next speaker, and then we'll get back with you. Thank you.
Everybody have a great week.
All right. Thanks a lot, folks.
And remember, if you're going to be doing the charcuterie board, to go take out your cheese from the fridge now, so it'll be at room temperature when we get to the demo.
We're getting ready for our second session. This is Jeanine Phillips, and she is the Executive Director of the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center, Inc. This is an educational non-for-profit organization located in Wichita, Kansas. It was co-founded in the year 2000 by Jeanine and Gretchen Andeal. I'm not sure if that's pronounced. Okay, and both of them are elementary teachers with a mission to serve children who struggle with significant reading, spelling, and writing difficulties, including those with dyslexia. The organization's mission specifically addresses the importance of teaching children to read, utilizing research, validated literacy instruction, and educating parents and educational and medical communities with the same intention and resolve. The organization teaches a training program that was accredited by the International Multisensory Structured Language Council for the purpose of offering accredited literacy courses to prepare educators for certification as the academic language therapist. She's been active in the state of Kansas as well as across the country, raising awareness of the need to properly assess and teach students of all ages with dyslexia to read, write, and spell. Kansas has been one of the last states in the nation to recognize dyslexia in the classroom. So she spent years lobbying to the Kansas State Department of Education, the State Department of Education, and the State Board of Regents and the Kansas legislative body for the past 21 years. She's honored to share her journey with all of us today and with our state organization, and hopes that it will inspire everyone to get involved, to get moving, to get those critical messages out to the state of Kansas so that we can improve the lives of Kansans. Thank you. Keep going then.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'll tell you, I was invited to do this by one of the parents at our school. We have a school for young children who are dyslexic, and she went to Topeka last time we went. So I think it was my 21st year to go to Topeka, and she invited me to talk to your group. I really was kind of not sure what I would say or do. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to tell the story. I'm going to share how we approached it, what kind of I learned as I walked down this path. I will tell you, I wished I'd had John Wilson and Vanessa Aragón, I guess that's how you pronounce her name. Wish I'd taken a class from them before I started. That was an amazing overview. I think it pretty much covered everything I've learned over the last 21 years, which was really my own self-education. My education started with the State Board of Ed, because nobody in Kansas has any idea still really what dyslexia is and is not. It led me then to talk to LEPC, which is the Legislative Educational Group, meets in the summertime. I did that 3 summers in a row, and then followed up with conversations with Board of Regents, State Board of Ed, and on and on. So again, it's been a journey. I know many of you, it sounds like, are just starting or have been indoctrinated to this journey. And what I'll begin with is the journey I started trying to raise awareness, get a law passed that would protect children who are dyslexic in our school systems across Kansas. We still don't have a law. So when John was talking about how many years it can take, absolutely, it can take a long time. What I will tell you is in 2020, we were able to get the legislative body to make a strong recommendation to the State Board of Ed about dyslexia. And that was done by forming a task force. The task force was a group of advocates, professionals from across the state who got together, talked once a month in Topeka, and then presented a year later recommendations that were all accepted. So what you learn along the way and what John shared with you is names of people, constituents who care deeply about your cause. And it was interesting for me to listen in as everybody talked about how similar this kind of push can be between those of us who are serving families and children in different ways. I'm constantly blown away by both the powerful scientific information that's out there and the degree of difficulty it takes to get a movement pushed through a legislative body. So that's kind of where I'll start. I do want to tell you a little bit about my organization. It really started with my own identification of dyslexia in my last year of college. And I'll go ahead and say of Wichita State University. I never heard the word dyslexia all the way through in any of my classes. And it was a professor in a reading practicum class who pointed at me and he said, "You're obviously dyslexic," on my last day of class. I was obviously horrified and humiliated. So approached him afterwards and I said, never heard the word. He assured me it didn't matter. I was gonna be great as a teacher. So I left college not knowing anything about dyslexia other than he recognized me somehow. And I had struggled to learn to read early in school. So that's where it started. I knew nothing more about dyslexia than that until my youngest child was identified as profoundly dyslexic when he was 7. I had to go to Texas to find out what to do to help him to learn to read, write, and spell. And that's where I was introduced to probably that first concept of what I'll call advocacy. Texas had initiated a law that protected children in 1985. That was the year my youngest son was born. And in 1985, Texas, with this law, established that every teacher had to have an awareness training part of their college education, know how to recognize it and what to do about it. So as I came back to Wichita from my first training class in Texas, I marched straight into the university, Wichita State University, and I said, "Hey, I just heard, these teachers in Texas have had training now for almost 10 years. What's going on at WSU? Why isn't anything happening?" And I was told very quickly it wasn't going to be recognized, never would be recognized in Kansas, and would not be served because it was a medical condition. So that got my mama bear kind of attitude started, and started me down the road to trying to change this for the state of Kansas. So that's where I started. John was so right, and I'll start with this myself because I never, ever would have seen myself as a dyslexic individual speaking before legislative bodies, governors, Senate hearings, representative hearings, no way. it is intimidating. And I'll never forget my first session where I walked up to the mic and started to talk about the need for us to all get behind understanding what kids need to learn to read. And the speaker who had the microphone looked up and said, "Who is this person? Why is she here?" And he leaned forward and he goes, "I'm sorry, I'm not understanding what it is you're trying to do or say." And I just kind of walked off and away from the podium. But since then, have learned to do a lot of the things that both John and Vanessa shared as they were chatting. So where did we start? Way back when, if you'll go to the next slide for me, it was the second year of starting my organization. And this would have been in 2001, where we had gotten the business opened, but we had started to come up against all kinds of resistance. And that resistance was creating an economic crunch. So I called a friend who I had met at Heartspring, and we had both left Heartspring and gone our separate ways, but she got to be CEO of the Humane Society in Wichita. So I arranged lunch with her and I said, you know, I've run into a big obstacle. I've got to figure out how to both advocate for children with dyslexia, but I also need to raise money. And she looked at me and she laughed, and that's why I put these slides here. And she said, "You know what? I've raised a lot of money on the faces of dogs. What I will tell you, and this is my first advice for you, is to use your faces of children." She said, "I can't imagine that if I could raise that kind of money on a dog's face, you would struggle to raise money with a child's face." And that was absolutely the best advice I ever received from anybody. So next slide, please. So the first year in 2002, when we went to Topeka, absolutely we used the faces of children and stories their parents told us. We created these cards with the kids' faces on them. And the first year we went, we were invited for a hearing on dyslexia, and it was the week of Valentine's Day. We were only given, I would say, 3 days to coordinate this, to get parents to go with us, their children. We took their children. This was a year I really didn't know how things worked, so we went straight into our hearing. We got there just in time to quickly hand out cards to all members who were on this particular hearing committee. And it was simply to begin to start the discussion about what needs to happen for children to be both recognized as well as served in Kansas. One of the things we learned that year was to take treats. And so from then on, every year we went, it was always around Valentine's Day, because that's how educational sessions run. You're generally about that week of Valentine's Day. So we always took Hershey's Kisses and little bags. We took groups of children, their parents. Sometimes the parents spoke, sometimes we didn't have time for them to speak, but we always hit all of the offices for every single one of the senators and representatives, which I did hear John mention that all of the legislators are grouped together, 4 to 5 in an office area, all have a secretary. And what we learned, and this is just, I'm going to give you just little tips along the way that you've probably figured out long before I did, but get to know the secretary for that group by name. Those secretary, we always took after probably the 3rd year of going to Topeka, we took gifts for the secretary as well and had lengthy conversations with the secretary. And oftentimes that opened the door to the representative or the senator we were trying to get up close to. So next slide, please. So there have been many representatives and senators who have listened, who took our cause to heart, who opened up hearings for us, who continued to make sure we were invited back. But it did take kind of sifting through, getting to know all of the senators and representatives who sat on education committees, and to be very certain about those committees, those specific committees who we were after. So this is just a few of the pictures of those that I came to know very well and who basically have helped keep us basically focused on and our cause. So it started with Jean Schodorf. Jean was Senate Education Committee Chair. So she was the first invitation we had to speak to the LEPC group. That was eye-opening for all of us. And there were always probably 3 or 4 of us who would go and we would line up to speak. The 2nd or 3rd year, Jean asked me to come and share information about dyslexia. And I actually got this opportunity to give a 30-minute kind of presentation on dyslexia. So I will tell you that it's worth following up. Every time you've got to make those phone calls after you meet a legislator. Certainly have conversations with that secretary. Like I said, we found that to be extremely, extremely important. And little gifts and attention getters never hurt. And that's what I will tell you too. The other thing is take children. Children can be risky, but I have found that if they're noisy, it's okay. They get attention. If they ask to participate, I have found let them do it. Make sure that they're prepped. Can help make contacts with those senators and representatives. So the next slide is a kind of one of the first moments where I realized how important it was to pull in national experts who we would wrap a conference around and then ask those national experts to talk to a representative or talk to a senator and educate them. So this first year was absolutely a accidental stroke of genius on my part. It was really because I was too dumb and too inexperienced not to just try this. I had heard Dr. Reed Lyon speak. He was head of NICHD's childhood behavior studies. He had studied dyslexia. He was the leading expert at NIH. And I had heard him at a conference, national conference speak. So I decided I wanted him to come to Kansas and speak to senators, and the governor, et cetera. So in 2003, we put together a lyceum, and a lyceum is an educational lecture that's done in a home, and you invite people to listen. So this is what we booked. We flew, let me back up. However, the invitation was what was crazy that I did. So Dr. Lyon worked at NICHD, and I had found stalks of glass wheat. So I wrapped those up really carefully, shipped them to him at NICHD, and waited to see if we would hear anything. What I did within a week, Dr. Lyon called me and he said, wow, that was quite an invitation. And I said, well, yeah, I put some thought into it. I wasn't sure the glass wheat stalks would make it. He said, oh yeah, they did. You wrapped them very well. And I could tell there was something there behind what he was saying. And so he finally opened up to say that NIH flagged the box as a possible bomb. So at that point, it raised all kinds of attention. They brought in a team, they x-rayed it. And of course, what they saw were these, they weren't sure what it was. So they did open up, and it was these beautiful glass stalks of wheat. So he said, good job. He said, I'm not sure you could have gotten to me without that. So I will tell you, there's risks in that, but at the same time, I learned early, real early on this journey, send something to get the attention of a speaker, a really high level speaker that you can put in front of a senator, a representative, or the governor, of which Dr. Lyon spoke to all divisions of education. For the invitation to the senators, we put together what you see here. It was folded piece that told the story of dyslexia. It was in a container that had a stamp that said, read this. And we delivered this little package to every single senator and representative. So we really found this one was a pretty easy invitation to get a lot of attention wrapped around our cause. So our next opportunity came in 2005. So the next slide is a conference where we did sink or swim. With this conference, again, we wrapped it around close to legislative sessions. And we invited Jonathan Mooney, who was a young man who had struggled through school because of dyslexia, very creative, very ADHD, very he was a tremendous speaker. And one of his themes was to sink or swim, that if you struggle to read, you've got to paddle hard to make it through school, but most young people sink. So we did this invitation to senators and representatives to invite them to a conference in Wichita to learn more about what happens to these young people who aren't recognized, who aren't taught how to read, what happens to them in their lives. Jonathan had a very, very tough time getting through. He was bitter, he was a little bit angry, but he was very powerful when it came to getting our message across to not just senators or representatives, but the public in general. This was a very large conference that we did. In 2006, which is the next slide. Yeah, okay, you guys, this was a way out there. You'll see kind of, I have a very creative graphic designer. He's amazing. I'd always give him a theme and he'd run with it and make sure all the pieces came together. This year, we were focusing on a body of research that had been put together by a gentleman by the name of David Bolton. He did this genius project where he brought over 100 of the top experts in the world on dyslexia, most of them neuroscientists or in that field of science, and he videoed them. He gave them something to talk about, a little different with each of them, videotaped them, and then he used these videos to tell the story. So as I shared this with my graphic designer, he put together this X-ray film. Basically, the envelope was the biggest envelope you could have. Down the side, he put the names of all these scientists in this X-ray. And then that was actually vellum that we printed the invitation on. This was a splash, you guys. This was crazy. Invited everybody to a conference where, again, they were educated by these videos, the best videos ever done of all these specialists in the area of dyslexia. So I would say this was probably our best orchestrated, most powerful, with the exception that I had one of the senators tell me that their child had an X-ray and she'd been waiting for it, and this envelope arrived. And she said when she saw all these names of these scientists listed down the side, she had misunderstood it. So she said she opened it, her hands were shaking. So I will tell you, you probably need a little focus group, and that's what we should have done. We had people we showed this to, they loved it. They thought, people will respond to this, and they did. But I felt terribly that I had really shaken this one senator up. So do think carefully through some of the fun things you deliver or send, and what can be that outside kind of thing that happens as related to it. So done a lot of fun things, met a lot of great people along the way. And this, I learned something from it. I learned to be careful. I learned to make sure I thought through what can happen if you do something that gets a negative splash to it. So the next slide is, again, this was my absolutely favorite conference. It was well attended by senators and representatives. The message was growing. Dr. Gordon Sherman had worked at NIH in the first years that dyslexia was discovered, and as it's where it's located in the human brain. He was hilarious. He told fabulous stories. He had left science and he had gone to run one of the country's most prestigious schools that enrolled children just with dyslexia. And he came to speak, and we did it was the creative brain. And we invited parents to attend a dyslexia hearing with Dr. Gordon Sherman. Everyone wore, and when we went to Topeka, everybody wore a Creative Brain t-shirt. And by this time, we had built constituents all across the state associated with dyslexia. What we identified was a parent group from every county. We reached out to them and we said, meet us in Topeka for a joint hearing. Again, this was a huge, the response was incredible. Every single parent brought a child and carried a poster with their county on it. Then we lined 7 parents up in a row to speak, to tell their story. And as if you've done this, you know, the more people who get opportunity to testify, the shorter the time frame is. So each parent had about 3 minutes. Some of the parents had tears. I will tell you, the first time tears flowed or a child slipped a word they shouldn't have, my heart would flip over. But what I learned is in almost all cases, it left a very powerful leave behind message. So, you know, I think you've heard a theme here that use family stories, use stories about how nutrition has affected lives or how anorexia, those kinds of stories are powerful. And in most cases, those parents who've lived through that tell a story that's absolutely the most compelling stories you can get. And I learned 20 years ago that it's those stories that are, they move mountains. And again, my journey has been long and difficult because Kansas refused to deal with dyslexia and left it trapped in the educational world, in the medical world. So, but, and you know, the problem is there's not a physician out there who knows how to identify dyslexia or can tell you, you know, what you need to teach them. So we started from absolutely no knowledge about a very important issue that affects a lot of children in the state. So again, my experience has told me to share it with you. Use kids' stories, family stories, busloads, t-shirts, buttons. We created buttons that we wore and handed them out. I was in Topeka after we did the button thing 3 years later, and a senator walked up to me and she said, "Oh, you're the woman with the buttons. Do you have some buttons with you today?" And I started laughing, and I happen to have a few in my purse. But that was the year I thought, okay, we're going to stick with this button idea. That worked well. So attention getters matter. So then our next slide, our coup de grace was in 2013 when so next slide, please. Thank you. We brought the Shaywitz team. The Shaywitz team out at Yale University had mapped the brain of dyslexia or individual with dyslexia. And we're part of NIH. This team were the big guys. We did have to find help in underwriting their costs. It was expensive, but again, I made sure these two were in Topeka and got a chance to share their incredible knowledge and experience with everybody I could. And it was absolutely amazing. And it was 2013 where we finally began to turn the corner. We began to get respect for what we were saying about dyslexia, the scientific basis to it, the information that the true science was very contrary to what was happening in schools to teach kids to read. So this was the team that finally really helped us turn that corner. So don't be afraid to reach out to the top experts in the world and try to get them to Topeka to help you educate those people who are critical to getting laws put into place and to changing outcomes. As I said, or it was spoken for me in our Kansas population and beyond. 2014, next slide, was Awareness to Action Conference, brought a very well-renowned advocate who basically did simulations of what it felt like to have ADHD and dyslexia. And then this young fighter by the name of Scott Sonnen. So it was a very opposites attract kind of conference. I will tell you that Scott Sonnen is the fighter's name, and he, that was a risk. The young people, though, loved him. The younger senators, the younger representatives loved his feisty attitude. So that was a year I kind of learned, my first guy told me, oh, you should have researched him more. By the time the conference was over, I thought, there you go. You kind of need to find something that speaks to everybody. 2019, which is the next slide, was after the legislature had established the dyslexia task force, and we brought all the speakers and those people who made that happen together in a conference at the Wichita Library. This one was at this point in time recorded. It was virtual. We made sure we got out what everybody said to those who we've obviously garnered thousands of people across Kansas who care deeply about dyslexia by this point in time. So we made sure we got the Kansas message out to our constituents. And at this point in time was this group met one more year to push forward the recommendations. And by 2020, again, we don't have a law, but we did get the task force recommendations accepted, which has now pushed forward with educator information at the college level as well as in service. It's led to better assessments for children, and as well as treatments that will hopefully come about. Unfortunately, as you can tell, this all happened right before COVID, and what we know, and this is, it's affecting all of us doing the great work we're doing across the country, legislatively or not. COVID has changed the landscape, and certainly what I would call the legislative landscape. But it's going to go away, and this is going to get easier, and we're going to get back to where taking children to the Capitol, their parents in buses, can happen. So we have not done that for the past 2 years. We will resume because I'm steadfast of making sure a law is put into place that will protect our children from the failure of learning to read appropriately in schools. So my last slide, and I have no idea. Oh yeah, I'm pretty good on time. That's a first, I would say. We today, of course, have social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're out there on all the different social medias. We try to keep best practices moving forward by offering lectures once a month in many different topics to keep new parents, new constituents kind of in the flow of information and advocacy and what needs to happen. So again, I'll just summarize by I found it was critical to make sure that we honed in on a mission and vision that was legislative. What are our goals? What are we going to do to meet these goals? We had, as you have heard, a huge mountain to climb. We started the whole project with focus groups of parents who shared their stories with the other parents. We matched these stories with data, and I encourage you to do that. You, again, use faces of children. Get a marketing person who pulls your message together, guides you. People who underwrite moments where you get parents together to speak on your behalf. It can't be expensive, and that's what I will share. And we would try to get out ahead of conferences or events in Topeka by about 6 months in fundraising for those things. Use contacts, you know, I heard that loud and clear with John and Vanessa's, the words they shared with you. Contacts to those legislators that have your same issue at heart, and stick with them and make sure that you keep them posted, call them back, answer questions, emails, those kinds of things to stay close to them. Use statistics versus, and I will tell you this, I've said data earlier or data. I found using statistics is much better than using data. One time I used the Shawitz's data on a study that was done in Connecticut, and I said dyslexia improved by 0.24. And again, that's what you get when you use data, these teeny little gains that nobody understands. But when you say dyslexia affects 1 in 5 on a sliding, on a spectrum basis, that's much more powerful. Use parents who can address stories that matter. Again, I'll repeat, don't worry about tears or a parent who goes on and on. I found, and those were wise words, when someone disagrees with you, just say, thank you for your time and walk away and keep a smile on your face. That's as important as anything. Slogans on shirts, those were always powerful for us. Find passionate people or a passionate person who's a marketer who gets what you're doing, but has a strong graphic design. If you can, and and I would guess probably you already have some kind of logo. You'll see our logo is a butterfly for many reasons, but we chose that many years ago, and it's part of everything we do, whether it's on our button, we have pens we hand out. These are awesome. And today a bunch of pencils came in. So, you know, it's that kind of stuff that leaves behind your name. So, gosh, I think that's the end of what I can offer. And I hope there was something there that was helpful. As I listened to the prior speakers, I thought, wow, this is, you know, it is a lot. So I'm open for questions.
So I had a question submitted to me. How soon do you usually follow up by phone after meeting in person with your legislature?
We found phone contacts before we went to Topeka were essential. And then as, you know, just saying, hey, we're going to be there, we'd like to speak to so-and-so. We always started with those people we knew. And usually then as we went into the offices to chat with them before a hearing, we would collect cards, you know, the business cards of the other legislators. Then we would ask parents or others to join us in callbacks. Usually as soon as that week's session was done, we would start callbacks or emails. So, you know, sometimes you can't get through, but it's just basically calling back to say, you know, I just wanted to follow up, see if you had any questions. Is there anything I can send you that, you know, that would help? And again, we stay very scientifically based, so that those things we sent were usually articles or, you know, scientific based information.
Great. And then another question I have is, did you ever consider hiring a lobbyist?
That's a great question. So yeah, after doing this for 20 years ourselves, I did this year talk to a lobbyist group, and they were very informed. They understood a lot about dyslexia, and they were educationally very focused. I liked them a lot, but I basically, it's, you know, it's a lot of money to involve lobbyists. So I backed away from it one day. I might use them. Right now, we seem to be doing okay with our once a year touch or connecting to those senators and representatives that, you know, we know ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was going to ask a clarifying question. So you would go in person like once a year?
Yeah, that's generally what we did when I was presenting for LAPC or I was sitting on the task force. That was giving me more opportunities to stop in the Capitol, and just most of the time I was talking to secretaries unless everybody was there in session. So, you know, our conferences we usually grouped very close to those hearings that I knew would be coming up educationally. I think I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I do see Paula Miller on the call, and Paula was the one who invited me to.
Yeah, thank you for speaking, Jeanine. I was just going to comment. I don't have a question, but just I think partly like your story and hearing what you've done through the years is really interesting. And I was one of the parents that attended Topeka it was before COVID, so it must have been 3 or 4 years ago. And I was just so struck by Jeanine's presence in Topeka and the things she shared today. And just I feel like to speak to your platform, Jeanine, there's 1 in 5 individuals who have dyslexia. So we all know people who have dyslexia who probably don't realize it and just think they're dumb. And Jeanine, they have a private school where she's at, and my daughter was there for 2 years, and she is back in public school, and she's an above average reader. She is doing great. So Jeanine's organization is truly changing lives in a huge, important way. And hopefully we can continue to impact Kansas laws positively so that kids get the help they need. So thank you so much for sharing the story today.
No, absolutely. Again, thanks for the invitation. I hope there was something in it that was helpful to those of you who are doing this really, really hard and oftentimes very frustrating work. I remember going home many times on a bus or driving by myself, just like, oh, you can just sense the, resistance, or having a bill ready to go and you're thinking, yeah, it's going to go. And then you find, no, it didn't, even get past the floor. So it's a journey. And I am so proud of each and every one of you for representing your cause. It's critical. I was thinking as I was listening in earlier, my oldest was born in Seattle, and I learned a lot about community involvement, community health, and the importance of early services for children, early in life services. And Seattle didn't have a food tax back in 1983. There's just, and I was stunned when I came to Wichita. We moved from Seattle to Wichita with the sales tax and needing to pay that again. So it's great things you guys are doing. And it's just surprising to hear that, kind of the similarities of our journeys. So keep up the great work.
So thank you, Jeanine. I was just thinking about what you're talking about, your experience in college, where your professor said, you had that and just a couple of weeks ago in the paper, they had the one about the track star at WSU, and they really helped her along and everything. So she had a lot better experience.
No, and
so I'm sure that your work has really helped, was really part of why she got better help than when you were in college. So.
Well, I hope so. As I was reading her story was identical to mine going through school and going through college on my own, with nobody knowing. Nobody knew. My mom and dad had no idea why I had struggled with grades, et cetera, when I was young in school, until I called them after the professor said, hey, you are dyslexic.
Yeah.
I'm
so,
what?
Yeah, what is that word? Thank you very much. You really kind of like what you said, that we got a lot of information from John and Vanessa, and then you kind of you backed it up with your experience. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, just be brave and, go forward. And I don't think you can get too out of the box to get legislators' attention. It's you really have to do it, whether it's a rally or a busload of people who don't fit in a hearing room. We've done it all. So
The year that I attended, there were like 3 or 4 kids sitting on the front row in the hearing making origami paper cranes, and they handed them out to all of the representatives after the hearing. And they loved it. Like they were all just so kind and not uptight, which is what I kind of expected. But yeah, out of the box.
Out of the box. I've always been that way though, out of the box. All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great conference.
Okay, and we're getting ready for the charcuterie board presentation. So if you want to get all your stuff out and get on board and make your stuff. Okay, we'll just take a little bit of break to get everything back on track. Okay, thanks. My introduction to people. Okay, now for the fun part, we have the sunflower spreads, which and it's a mom and daughter duo who share their love for cheeses with the community. And not only do they make charcuterie boards for individuals, but they also travel all over Kansas and Nebraska to host workshops to teach about cheeses and more. So let's start our charcuterie boards.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. Yeah, like she said, I'm here with Sunflower Spreads. My name is Cecilia. My mom could not join us today. Like she kind of mentioned, we do travel a lot. So I'm located in Manhattan, and this is kind of my side gig. My main job throughout the day is I work for K-State Athletics, doing all of their marketing. So, and then my mom lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is where that random Nebraska tie kind of comes in. And she is a nurse by day. So this is something where we kind of started it. You know, everybody was trying to find a hobby of some kind during quarantine. And actually my husband was like, you're spending a ton of money on cheese. So either find something to do with it or we've got to cut back. So here we are. And that is kind of how we started Sunflower Spreads. So we are going to be doing this virtual workshop today. So if anybody has questions or needs help with anything, please let me know. I'm happy to just jump in and re-explain things. It's obviously a little bit different than being in person. I wish I could be in person with you all just to kind of show you different things, but please feel free to stop me at any moment if you do have questions, comments, concerns. So we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to flip my camera here. All right, can everybody see my station?
Yes.
Great. So you guys should have all got the instructions and the handout sheets with your shopping list. And for those of you who did not buy supplies, you're totally cool. Feel free to just kind of watch. And luckily this is being recorded, so you can kind of go back and see different things at any time that you would like. So on that list, you'll notice there's kind of some steps that we follow along when making a charcuterie board. So one of the big things is obviously your board. And I heard a few of you kind of going back and forth of if your board size is going to be enough, if it's going to be okay. Honestly, it's totally up to you on kind of what you prefer or how many you're feeding. So this one is going to be a little bit over 1 foot long. And I honestly use it as a cutting board. If you don't have a board, if you don't have a physical board and you want to ever just use a cutting board or any kind of serving platter, that totally works too. There's really no rhyme or reason to what board you'd like. You can kind of use your creativity regardless of what board you're using. So that's going to be the first thing when you're picking out and getting your board ready. So with that, the second one is you should have gotten a couple little small bowls or different things along those lines. So that is always my step one when making a board. So with that being said, I'm not a huge olive fan. So I have little sweet pickles that I already have in a container. So if you've got one small container and you want to utilize it for your olives, or if you've got nuts or pickles or jam, whichever you kind of prefer, that's going to be one of my round items that I place on the board. So I've got that one. Another thing you can do, so if you've got just a jar of jam that you want to toss on there, you totally can too. It's up to you. If you're only feeding a couple of people, you may want to get a little bit less, but it's totally up to you. It's kind of an aesthetic thing where you can just physically place it directly on your board and utilize it more as a what we call an anchor. So these items are what we're going to utilize as our anchors, and what that means and what I use that for is basically you're utilizing them and you're going to build your board around it. So you're going to connect your meats with these two items, or you're going to build your cheese around it. So it's kind of up to you what you're using for your circle items. I am actually going to take this guy off, but again, if you ever want to use just a full jar, you can, or even honey, jam, anything that you want to put in a jar. I have a smaller little guy that's just kind of a ramekin size that I like to utilize just to maybe not waste as much jam if people try and put their utensils in it or something along those lines, and other things get inside of it, utilizing just this guy. So with our anchor items, do not feel bad if you are moving them around multiple times. Again, these are just there to utilize and give you something to build around, so it's not just a flat surface. I move these probably 4 or 5 times when I'm making something, just because I build it and then I'm like, man, I don't like that as much, and I want to move it around a little bit. So that's going to be that step 1 or 2, depending on how you look at it, based off of your board or not. So then we're going to go ahead and move on to step 3. So step 3 is going to be our cheeses. So we're going to start with our soft cheeses. So I've got brie. I don't know what everybody else has, but this is going to be my usual go-to one, just because, one, it's another circle item that I can put on my board. That's easy for, easy to cut, easy to space out, easy to style. So that's going to be one of them. Does anybody have brie that may not be in a round? It may be more of like a triangle shape.
I do.
You do? Okay. So we're going to go through first, and I'll show you how to cut this. If you ever have like blue cheese or brie that's maybe more in that triangle cut, you won't want to cut this if it's in that shape. The round, when it's round, you'll want to cut it just because you want to make sure that you get that middle part to show. But if you've ever got just like a triangle shape or a wedge of brie or blue cheese, really, when that comes out, you're just going to place it directly on your board. So if you do have that one, feel free to just go ahead and put that guy on your board. But we're going to start with the brie. So I just, if you live in a city with Aldi's going to be your best friend for any type of meat, cheese, etc. You can get it at Hy-Vee, Kroger, Price Chopper, whatever as well. But it's the same thing, and it's just cheaper at Aldi. So there are going to be a couple different ways that I will show you how we can cut this brie. Or any of circle cheese. So if you've got like the Cambria, whatever, and then it's also in a circle shape, you can use this as well. So just a little background on brie. It is based out of France. Now they kind of make it all over the world, but when it first started, it was based out of, they did it in France, and it is going to be a cow out of cow milk. So
don't need that. Hi, how you doing?
it is
Good, sending off Valentine's.
Basically,
Did
added
you do yours?
pancake, and then it's sprayed. It's kind of gross, but it's sprayed with a type of mold. If I knew how to actually
Fill
pronounce
these
it,
out
I would
before.
tell you, but it's a little bit
Do
tougher.
the pens work on here, or should I use a marker?
Kind of gross.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So there's a couple different ways you can cut this. So if you have just a regular knife, paring knife, that totally works. If you have a wire cutter, that can work as well. It just kind of depends on your preference. But if you don't have the wire cutter, not a huge deal. You can utilize just a regular knife. So I'm gonna take it out here and put it on I might cut it on this guy so you guys can see it a little bit better. So when I am cutting this, if it's in a circle, there's really one way to cut it, and then it's depending on how you style it, how that works. So you're going to cut it in half, and then cut your halves in half, and then cut your halves in half. So you should get a total of 16 pieces. So basically you're cutting each half into 8s. Does that make sense? So go ahead, we can start cutting those guys up. And if you're ever cutting brie and realizing or seeing that it's a little sticky, if you're wanting to, like, maybe it's summertime and it's going to be hot outside and you want to make sure that it's cut correctly at first, go ahead and put it in the freezer for maybe 3 to 5 minutes before you start cutting it. That way it's may not as sticking as much to your knife or your board. But cheese is actually served best at room temperature. So when you are building your board, you're going to hear me say this a lot, to utilize stuff right out of the fridge when you're cutting it, or put it in the freezer. That's the easiest way to cut it. But you do want to kind of set it out for at least 30 minutes prior to serving it, just because it gets cooler, it cools off, and it gets that flavor. So, okay. The other thing, you're welcome to use your whole wedge or not. It's totally up to you. If you ever are getting, so I heard someone mention earlier, you felt like maybe you had too much cheese. So if you feel like you have too much cheese and you don't want to utilize the whole thing, do not cut all of it. So once cheese is cut, it doesn't last as long. So for example, if you got a huge block of like manchego and you're only going to use half of it, don't cut the whole thing because it won't last as long. Now, it's not going to go bad right away. It'll last a couple more weeks, but cheese is one of those things that does last quite a long time. So if you don't cut it, you can utilize it for a lot longer. So, okay. Now that we've kind of got it cut, I will show you a couple different ways that you can style it. So when I am using it, the first one, it's just going to be called like a pinwheel type thing. So brie tastes best, I think, with jam, honey, those types of things. So I usually like, when I'm putting it on my board, I like to put it around the jam or next to the jam. So that way my guests or whoever's serving the board kind of knows, hey, these things go together. So what you're going to do is, obviously you've got like the outside rind is going to be a little bit softer, and then obviously the inside is going to be sticky. So with your first piece, you're just going to lay it down kind of on the sticky side. And if you need to move your jam or whatever to kind of build on it too, you can do that. Like I said, you're going to move a bunch. So then you're just going to start stacking and building around it to where it basically is just making a circle. And you can kind of see down here, my brie was a little bit warm from sitting out, so it did stick to my board a little bit. So I'll have to wipe that sucker up, but that's all right. So you're just going to kind of build this pinwheel. And then once you're done building around it, you should have that little bit of a centerpiece. And that is where I will set my jam down. So again, it kind of pushes my guests to understand, if I'm not standing right by them or haven't had time to explain it, that it kind of goes together. So then once it's all together, you can kind of push it together to make sure so that it's more flat and even and more of a circle. And then you just set that guy right there on top.
So my camembert that I got is like oozing. It's very, very oozy.
Yep.
Any suggestions for that? Because it's not going to hold a shape.
Yep. So with that, that's probably going to be that type of thing where it is going to be a little bit more melty. So next time you're cutting it or utilizing it, I would suggest putting it in the freezer for a little bit before you cut it. That way it kind of holds its shape and is a little bit firmer. And then it's supposed to be kind of gooey, right, when you're actually eating it. So once it hits that room temperature, it'll get that gooey texture again. But yeah, that's like the weird part about cheese, right? Is you want to have it, you want it one temperature to cut it, but one temperature to eat it. Okay, so I'm going to just cut the rest of this here just to kind of show you guys one more way that you can style this guy. So you can always utilize it as more of like a line as well, where you're just still stacking it. So you're always, whenever you're utilizing brie, you're always going to kind of stack it on or lay the first piece down on the sticky side. So that way you can kind of build around it and build on top of it. So, okay, how do we feel about the brie? Feel okay? Okay. So my second soft cheese is going to be, I have some goat cheese here. What does everybody else have? Does anybody have blue cheese? Or we got some goat cheese? Okay, so another thing to keep in mind with goat cheese, or like a reminder, any type of cheese, this is going to be a ton for one person, 1 to 2 people. So I usually say you want to do like maybe 2 to 3 ounces of cheese per person and 3 to 4 ounces of meat per person, based on what you're serving. It can adjust based off if you're serving it as a meal, like a full meal, or if it's just an appetizer. But this is going to be a 6-ounce log of cheese. So that's a ton for, well, let's say this board is probably for going to be about 2 people. So with that, I'm not going to cut the whole thing because I want to make sure that the rest of it stays fresh. So this is going to be a cranberry cinnamon. So this is trying to stick, it's kind of hard to see, but it is more of like a yellow, or excuse me, like a reddish color. So trying to stick with like a Valentine's Day type of theme here. So again, with goat cheese, you can utilize just a paring knife like normal. Again, if it's room temperature, it'll probably crumble a little bit when you are cutting it. So that's why I would recommend kind of putting it in the freezer for 3 to 5-ish minutes, similar to that brie cheese if you're utilizing it. I prefer a wire cutter for this type of cheese. Again, if you don't have a wire cutter, the paring knife works just fine. Also, if you have unscented or unflavored, I guess, dental floss, that's another way you can utilize it. Mint just may make it taste a little funny, but if you've got just regular dental floss, you can utilize that as well. So this one, again, there's not much styling you can do when you're using goat cheese, because a lot of the time it's got that pretty white or off red. This one's gonna be a little pinkish in the middle color. So basically we're just gonna start cutting it and get our slices. And depending on what kind of goat cheese you have, like this obviously has a bunch of cranberries on the outside, so it does get a little bit messy. Another one of my favorites, I don't know if anybody's grabbed it, but if you have it, the blueberry vanilla goat cheese is like God's gift to earth. Becca, I see you nodding. Do you have that one? Yeah, it's so stinking good. So again, this is also from Aldi, and the blueberry vanilla goat cheese is from Aldi. You can buy it at Hy-Vee, Kroger, but it's just going to be cheaper there. So you can kind of see it's got that pretty center, and that's kind of what we want to show off. So when it keeps that edge, you can keep the cranberry stuff on it, obviously. And then this stuff, really the only way that we can kind of style it is just by laying it flat. So I'm going to go ahead and utilize my pickle anchor and just kind of lay that first one flat and wrap it around here like so. And show off that pretty color. The goat cheese is going to be, you'll notice a lot of cheeses are all going to be, they're pretty boring in color. So your goat cheese, your fruit, and your garnish is really where you can utilize the different colors to kind of make everything pop. So just keep that in mind as you're shopping around for things and wanting to make sure that it's bright and colorful. So, all right. Any questions that we're talking about the soft cheeses? All right, we will go ahead and move on here to our hard cheeses. So I have cheddar, a white cheddar cheese, and then a manchego. Is that, what else do people have? Anything fun or different?
I have a Gouda Parm.
Okay. Oh, nice. Where'd you get that one?
Hy-Vee.
Okay. Nice. That one sounds yummy. I'm going to take this stuff off because I want to utilize this space a little bit more. Okay, cool. So there's a couple different things that I kind of want to show here. So obviously this cheddar is going to be a block. So if you ever, I'll show you a couple different ways how we'll cut this, because if you ever have, maybe I make cheese boards a lot for my grandparents who live in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and they don't want fancy cheese. They want like Colby Jack or cheddar, just regular cheddar, or those types of things that normally come in a block. Just because they're going to be the more common cheeses doesn't mean that you can't cut them fancy. So we'll go ahead and get this guy cut. Again, I'm not going to cut the whole thing because I don't want to utilize the whole thing. I'll probably use half of it. Pull it from there. So if you have a block of cheese or just a square, this is kind of the way that you can do it. So first one is just going to be our basic squares, right? So we're just going to have squares, and we can lay it like so, and just kind of stack it around our board. So if that Gouda Parm is going to be square, that's a way you can use that one too. I'm trying to like block the sun here so you guys can see it a little bit better. Again, pretty easy there to just kind of stack, and I'm going to cut a couple more pieces here. This guy to wrap it all the way around. Okay. Another way, if you do have just a square block of cheese, basically, if you've got, you'll start with just the squares, but another way you can cut those squares in half to make little triangles, and then we'll style them a little bit different ways. So there's a couple ways. Triangles are really one of the most, it looks really fancy when you're making a board. It's super easy, but it's a lot, maybe a little bit fancier for your guests or whatever. So there's a couple different ways. You could you'll lay one flat and kind of start by stacking like that way to make it almost like a zipper. So that's an option. You can always just lay one flat and stack again, like so. And maybe these smaller pieces will fit your crackers a little bit better. So really with triangles, there's a ton of different options that you can utilize, and most of your regular cheeses just come in a block. So I think I like this one. So I'm going to go back to this guy. Questions about this one? Okay. When you're working with kind of cheddar cheese, it is going to be a little bit tougher to cut when it's right out of the fridge. So, but really it just takes a little bit of muscle to cut that one, but you should be all set there. All right, so that is going to be that one. So then I've got my next one here. Again, I had a big chunk of manchego that I did not use all of it for, so I got this one out. Does anybody else have manchego? Okay, this one, you'll notice it does have a rind on it. Does anybody know if you can eat this? Okay, so I just learned actually you can eat it. So this is edible. I don't love it because I'm a texture person. So I don't necessarily want to eat it. But in case one of your guests, you're serving it, one of your guests is like, oh my gosh, I ate that. It's not a huge deal. So the way you can kind of notice too, when you are working with a cheese that does have a wax rind, you're able to kind of see between the cheese and the wax will kind of peel off easily. This obviously does not, because the way that the manchego is kind of made is it's put in a barrel, and that's kind of where this texture comes from. So when it's sitting in the barrel and aging, this is coming straight from the barrel, and when it's aging, just kind of on the edge there. So again, you're welcome to serve it, or if you just feel more comfortable cutting it off, that's totally cool too. It's kind of up to your preferences. So this one is going to be the manchego. So any kind of hard cheese is going to be a little bit tougher to cut. So a paring knife will work. Sometimes I utilize a little bit bigger knife. When we buy manchego, we buy it in bulk. So we get like 1/4 of a wheel of cheese from Costco. So it's huge. So I get a little dramatic and I'm using, like, I utilize a cleaver. But that's just more so I don't hurt my hands as I'm like trying to cut it. But so we are going to, I'm just going to use this regular paring knife here and get this guy cut. So I'm going to cut it in half just to get a couple smaller pieces here, and then maybe not utilize the whole thing. So once I cut it in half, and again, I keep the rind on it. Again, the flavor is all in the rind. So if you've ever bought like one of my favorites that you can get from Hy-Vee or Dillon's as well as the Merlot cheese, or they have like bourbon cheese, any of those flavored wine cheeses, you'll notice they have a color on the outside. Whoops, broke that guy. Those ones, you'll notice that those flavors or those pieces taste the best, I think, because they've got all that flavor in there. And that's going to be because it's aged a little bit the same way as this, where it's aged in a barrel. So all that flavor is going to start at the edge and then work its way in. So again, I keep it on here just because that way I get a little bit of that flavor and it allegedly lasts longer. So, okay. So here's another way. These are a little bit longer triangles that you can see compared to my regular cheddar. So depending on your kind of board that you've got, you can do a couple different things here. So the first one with the rind down, or again, if you just have long pieces, you can style it what I like to call just the crown. So you're just going to be stacking it like so and making a crown. If you're going to use this one, usually this works well if you don't have a board with edges. So this one might be a good example where basically you're just kind of laying it down however you want to show off that one. Another one, especially these pieces can get kind of big and they can take up quite a bit of space on your board. So my favorite one, and the most common one that I usually use, is what's called the zipper. So you're going to take your first piece with the rind out, so either on the left or right hand side, and then you're going to take your next and put your rind to the opposite. So we're just going to keep going back and forth to make what looks like a zipper. So it'll sit flat on your board like so. Everybody see that okay? Sorry, the sun is coming in just right. And then that one, I'm just going to kind of set in the middle and I can build around it. What other cheeses do we have out there that we have questions about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Mine has a funny shape. It's like rounded at the end, so I can't make a perfect triangle. Do you have a suggestion for that? I have a Gouda.
Yeah.
If you slice it, slice like this. I have a boat.
Cool. So that Gouda, excuse me, does have a rind on it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes with a Gouda, if it has a rind, you can, sorry, I chucked my water wrong. With your Gouda, you can use it as like, I'd cut the rind off so that people know not to eat it, right? So sometimes you can put that rind directly on your on your board, and I would just cube it. So if you just cube your Gouda, and then you're gonna put it, keep your rind on your board as like a border or something to kind of house that Gouda. So if you've got your Gouda rind here, then you're just going to cube your Gouda, sorry, and throw it in there.
You're okay.
So same with that cheddar, Merlot, Gouda, those are all ones that are really easy to just to just cube up if you have the space. We're going to try one more drink of water here. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you cut, I just want to check, you cut the rind off and then use that as the border and then put the cubes inside the border.
Exactly. Yep. So that might be something that may be good on the edge of your board, or I think you had the main board, right?
Yep.
So if you want to do it around kind of like one of the edges, you could utilize it there. So that if you have a cheese that has a rind, it's really helpful, especially on like a flat board, to utilize it on the edge. Because sometimes if you're trying to transport it from maybe the fridge or from your house to a friend's house, if you've got the edges taken care of, then things may not fall So that's how I would kind of utilize that right. Good question. Other questions? Also, if you're ever feeling lazy and don't want to cube it, you can always just buy cubed cheese. Again, Aldi is a great place. They have pre-cubed white cheddar, so this same cheese that comes in the block, they have it pre-cubed as well. So lots of different options there from that standpoint. Okay, we are going to move on to our third step here, which is going to be the meat. So the two meats that I have today are going to be just an Italian salami and a prosciutto. Does anybody else have anything else? Maybe like a hard salami or like a tubed calabrese or anything along those lines? Okay, so we are going to start by showing, I'm going to start with my salami. So there are a couple different ways that you can, a couple easy ways just to kind of style this stuff. So the first one is pretty easy, and it's helpful for guests. So if you're having a bunch of guests over here, it can be easy just to utilize this way. So all I'm going to do is take my round piece and fold it in half, and then continue to take pieces, fold in half, and almost make like a stack, so that people can see where the piece starts and where the piece ends. And take, again, salami usually comes in quite big bags, so it's totally up to you on how much you actually want to use. So this I'm gonna just maybe stack around my brie and push it down a little bit. You'll notice here your hands are going to get kind of greasy. It's kind of gross sounding, but you want to utilize that grease. So when you're squeezing the pieces together, that grease will help it stick together, so they're not maybe flailing out as much. And so that's a really easy one. Again, nothing fancy, but sometimes it just looks a little bit better than if you're just taking the round pieces and throwing them on your board. Okay. Two more pieces here. So the next one, hold it up there. So the next way is what I call, or what the cheese world calls the river. So we're still using salami. What you're going to do here, and this one, I haven't found the best way to explain it, so please tell me to show you a different way or show again if you can't, if this one's tough. So you start with a piece. You're going to fold it in half, and you're going to fold it in half again. Okay, so you've got one. You're going to do the exact same thing for another piece. Fold it in half, fold it in half again. So you should have two pieces with folds. Okay, so what we're going to do here, you'll see these flat sides, and then the folds are going to face each other. You'll open them up and you'll slide them together, keeping that flat edge. Okay, you've got them folded in half. You've got your folds facing each other with the flat side here, and you're folding them and sliding them together. Okay, how we feel? Again, so you've got them folded in half. You're going to put those two fan sided or the folded sides together, push them together, and make that. So you do want it to be flat here. So the goal is it should be able to just sit up in your hand or on your board. So it should sit flat. So you're just going to keep doing this. So that's one link, and I'm going to make another link. All right, so I've got my next one here. I do the exact same thing, and then it's going to be together. So I'm going to start stacking them or setting them next to each other. So I fold one in half, fold it in half again. fold one in half, fold it in half again. Take those folds, slide them together to make a link. It's flat on that side. How are we feeling about this? Now, another way that you can utilize it, or when you're folding it, you can always fold it in half again, and leave it like this. And you can just continue to like kind of stack them next to each other, where it maybe they're not folding them into each other. You're just folding that one piece and utilizing it that way. Now, see this one, how it kind of fell apart? I want to make sure that I'm squeezing it a little bit harder together when those two pieces and using that grease to keep them, keep those two slices stuck together there. Now this, when you are making the river, you are going to want to try and utilize, put them in between things. So this is where your anchors may come in, where you can kind of put, see how I'm putting in between the goat cheese and the manchego just to have an option. So if for some reason somebody grabs one, the rest of them may not unfold. They're going to kind of go hand in hand together here instead. So they're not going to fall apart. Okay. Thoughts on our river here? Questions? Okay. So I'm going to go to my next meat here, which is going to be my prosciutto. So if you have prosciutto, let's get out of the way. And show you how to do a prosciutto ribbon. So there's a couple different ways that you can style prosciutto. My favorite is going to be the ribbon, just because I like utilizing the fat on the top of it. It's just pretty. Prosciutto is just a super, I think, beautiful meat and easy, and really goes with anything. So if you have prosciutto that has the plastic in between each piece, that's super helpful. You're going to want to kind of utilize that. So I'm going to pull off my first piece here. So when you are making your ribbon, what you do is you've got your piece, and with the fat side up, I'm going to fold it in half here. So fold that bottom half up, and then once I've got it folded, it should kind of stick together, and I'm going to peel off my plastic. And then all you're going to do here is you're just going to kind of start going back and forth, folding it back and forth. You should have a ribbon. So with that fatty piece at the top, just it's going to look nice with the white there from that. So I'm going to maybe put this here. So I'm going to go again where I'm going to pull off a piece. And we're going to, and if it even pulls a little bit apart like this, it's not a huge deal because you're going to end up folding it up anyway. I'm going to fold it in half there, stick it together, peel it off my plastic, and then I fold it one way, and then fold it the other, and then this way, and the other. And you're kind of pressing it together and pinching it more towards the bottom so that your ribbon there at the top is going to be more fluffed out and the bottom will be stuck together. So we're gonna put that guy there. You can kind of see your ribbon's gonna be starting to come together. There's not many places, and I know for sure in the Manhattan area. I don't know if the closer you get to like Kansas City, if you have the option to get this cut at a deli. So if they do cut prosciutto for you at a deli, it's not going to obviously have the plastic in between, which is totally fine. But like I mentioned at the beginning, prosciutto is just going to be a really pretty meat. And so there's nothing wrong with just kind of letting it fall on the plate. So for example, if I just have a piece here, I'm almost just going to like curl it back and forth like so. and just kind of let it fall, but still having that fatty piece at the top, just because again, it gives that color contrast. And it's gonna, again, I just think look pretty the way it kind of falls. So I'm gonna keep going here though with my ribbon. If we have hard salami, or if you ever get hard salami or like log calabrese or anything along those lines, really with that, the only kind of option to do, I would not try and fold it, because obviously it's not going to work that great. But really just cutting them into the little circles and just stacking them is always an easy win there. And that one's really good. And it's kind of nice too, because they're going to be the right size for like crackers, or if you've got your cut cheese, kind of smaller pieces like this, it goes well with that size as well. But that could always be more of like an edge piece that you've kind of utilized there. So what questions do we have about meats, about the meat choices? Do we have anybody have prosciutto and trying the ribbon?
I'm trying the ribbon, but I think mine's too thin. It keeps falling over.
Does it? Okay. It's one of those things, like obviously mine are definitely not perfect, but it definitely takes practice. And sometimes, did you get it in a package or did it come from a deli?
I got it in a package.
In a package, okay. So the one that I'm using is just going to be, again, you guys will get tired of hearing me say Aldi, but it's just this, I know it's backwards, sorry. It's just the Appleton Farms. So that's all that meat from Aldi. And that's the one that I usually just like to utilize. Again, it's a little bit thicker, but sometimes it can be kind of tough with prosciutto because it's such a delicate meat that you try and utilize. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so this next part is really what I think is the most fun when you start to utilize your fill your board. So obviously there's lots of holes and this board is kind of boring with color because the cheese is going to be the same color, the meat's going to be the same color. So this part is really where you're going to see your board kind of start to come to life. So I have strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, some grapes, and then dried apricots. That's a ton. It's probably only need 2 or 3 different things, but there's lots of different options. So if anybody does have grapes, I just want to show you one thing. So I keep my grapes on the stem just because it's a little bit easier, especially if you have a flat board, they're not going to roll away, but you can utilize them this way. So I usually try and get 2 bunches, reason being, when I'm putting on the board, again, I keep it on the stem, but I don't really want anybody to see the stem. So if I put one down, then I can kind of utilize the other one to pull them off and just kind of fill in spots where I want it to look a little bit fuller. And then you can kind of adjust it or place them the right way where they're not going to roll off if you do try and pick up your board. So you may have extras, which is totally cool too. The other one, let's see. So strawberries, you can either just place them right on the board. Again, their color is helpful. Another way I like to style them is either just cut them directly in half. That way it gets you that flat side. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to prop them up on things if they're flat. You know, strawberries can come in really weird shapes. So if you cut them in half, utilizing that is always an option as well. Another way just to add a little bit of creativity you can do. So if you've got your strawberry, you're going to just cut not all the way through, kind of to the stem and just cut 4 or 5 lines. It's really up to you, however many, depending on how big your strawberry is. And then you just kind of fan it out to make, I don't know, some kind of fancy strawberry fan type thing that you can utilize and lay out on your board. Obviously Valentine's Day is coming up. So another way that you can do strawberries is if you've got it and you're just gonna cut like a V in the top. And I usually just cut around the stem. You're cutting your V and then you're kind of pulling it out. You can make a heart with your strawberry, make it look somewhat festive. And then again, you're just going to kind of fill. So one other thing I did want to show you guys, I don't know, does anybody have like a kiwi or an orange or anything like that? Okay. One thing I do want to show you, because it's something that's one, a kiwi is a great color, same with an orange or even lemons or limes that add color to your board. So if anyone watches TikTok, you may have seen a kiwi star or a fruit star that you can put on boards. So that's what I'm going to show you right now, just as a FYI, so that next time you're making a board, you can utilize this technique. So if you've got a kiwi, it's got the stem and then the other part of it here. So you're going to hold it like that. You're going to take that same paring knife, and what you can do is you're basically just going to start making a little zigzag, and you're going to go all the way around with your zigzag. You're going about halfway through your kiwi. You don't want to go all the way through. If you ever had a kiwi, you know it has that kind of soft core inside, so you're going to go towards that core. If you do happen to go all the way through, it's really not that big of a deal. Just try not to do it all the way around because it will not work. But I've definitely done that before when I grab a kiwi and it's soft and I'm like, oh, yep, I went all the way through. So you're going around. If you don't exactly match up on the other side, it's not the end of the world either. No matter what, it'll look nice. Like you can kind of see here, mine is not even up here, and I'm just going to kind of go down, not even. So you'll notice I went all the way around here, and all I'm going to do is work it back and forth. And you've got your kiwi star. Again, you can do it with oranges, grapefruits, lemons, limes, and again, it's a way to get color on your board. That's simple. So the other way to get color on your board, so steps, the last two steps when it comes to your fruit and your garnish are going to kind of be similar. They go hand in hand. They're really just helpful to add to your board. So I also have this flower. This one, again, most flowers you can get are going to be edible. I would suggest it just in case. But flowers, bright colors, you can add to your board as well. I'm gonna move these guys around. I think I want this here. I'm gonna just throw some blueberries in the middle there to fill that space up. And then throw some blackberries on top of it to give a little bit of texture there. I'm going to keep it kind of empty over here just because I like the way it looks. I got a question here from Carol. Are kiwis intended to be eaten or for decoration? Totally up to you. So people may ask you if people like them and want to eat them, they sure can. Kiwis, you can also eat the outside. The outside is edible. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a total texture person, and the fuzziness is super weird to me. But if people want to eat, excuse me, sorry. If people do want to eat them, they definitely can. I also, so I'm going to throw my dried mangoes. Again, another good color to utilize. And then, oh yeah, Becky, that looks awesome. Yeah, good work. It's so much easier than you'd think it is. Like, you see them and you're like, whoa, that looks way too complicated for me. Not that bad.
It's pretty forgiving.
Yes, right. And even like mine didn't even match up when I was going all the way around, and it still looks fine. So, okay. I also usually like to add some kind of chocolate or dessert. So again, I'm sticking with my Valentine's theme of pink pretzels. I made some sea salt caramels. So just kind of toss those on there and give it some more color. Now you're probably wondering and looking at mine, where am I going to put my crackers? So I don't, goodness, I do not ever put my crackers on my board. Reason being, I normally make them in advance and I don't want them to get soggy. Also, crackers are just kind of boring, especially when you're making a board. You don't really want to get like super flavorful crackers because I think that just takes away from the cheese and the stuff you have on your board. It's going to be more so just as a item to keep all your stuff together. So like I said, I try and not utilize crackers directly on my board. So if you've just got like a plate, a little serving plate to set them on the side, you can totally do that. And it makes it just a little bit easier for your guests to know that there are crackers, but you may not want them to get gross and soggy on here. So we're gonna just put that guy there. So I've got my flour, and then I also have just some rosemary. That's always a good one too. Rosemary, thyme, basil, lavender is totally up to you. And I just usually kind of put it on the sides just to kind of put, give it that complete look here, wrap it around different things. Go from there. How are we feeling about our boards? How are they looking? Do we feel good? Are we proud of what we made? Oh, I'm looking at one.
My board is bigger than I thought it would be.
Yep. Which is something that happens to me kind of a lot as well. So again, depending, this one here, honestly, would like feed 2 to 4 for a dinner. This might be even something that's more of a 4 to 6 to 7 type of board for an appetizer. So even if you do have a big board, that's totally fine. I sometimes just suggest looking and starting in the middle, right? So that way you can start in the middle and kind of build out. Because if you've got edges on the outside, open edges on the outside, you can kind of see I've got a few open edges here, just more so on the corners, which is totally fine. But that's a lot easier to almost cover up than a big board that the edges or the middle is not covered. Let's see, Morgan, I can kind of see yours. I love it. I love that Mickey Mouse board. Casey, how does yours look?
So I didn't make a full charcuterie board.
That's all right.
But I did get the kiwi stars cut.
Yeah, I love it. It's the toughest part about making a board is not snacking, especially right now when it's like almost dinner time. Nice, Becky. Is that a grapefruit you got?
No, those are those oranges.
Oh, it's an orange. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Ooh, nice. Like scrolling.
Yeah, I decided just to get the food out and eat, and then I'll.
No judgment.
I need to have a reason, and I'll make a.
There you go.
Event.
There you go. All right. I know that sheet that you guys got as well did have wine pairings. So just keep in mind, honestly, there's really no rhyme or reason when you are drinking wine and pairing it with a cheese. My kind of go-to is if you think it tastes good together, great. Another just easy rule of thumb, if you're ever hosting a party and doing something along those lines, what grows together goes together is what I try and like keep in mind. So if I'm serving with a Brie, which is based out of France, then some kind of French wine, or the Manchego, which is based out of from the Manchega sheep in Spain, some kind of Spanish wine. But again, it's really up to you. What you think tastes good is what's gonna go together. So what other questions do we have? Okay.
You said sometimes you make yours ahead of time. Is there certain parts or a certain amount of days ahead of time you can probably make it and save it that you'd recommend, or parts to do and parts to wait on?
Yep, good question. So if I usually try and make them the day of, but with that being said, sometimes there's just not time, right? So if you're doing it the day before, that's totally cool too. I usually say it lasts with everything on the board about 48 hours in advance. For some reason, strawberries are just gross and they get moldy so much faster than everything else. So usually if I am gonna just make it in advance a little bit further than that, keeping strawberries off and putting them on last is always a good option, because again, they're just like gross thing. If you have bowls, maybe with the pickles and the olives, I wait on. Again, if they're put in those bowls to utilize as your anchors, you can go ahead and at least put those bowls on there so that you can build around it. But sometimes they don't go bad, they just don't smell the best, in my opinion. So that pickle and olive smell can take over your board completely. So if you put it in like press and seal wrap or something, or a lid on it, then sometimes it can engulf in that smell when you're taking it off. So that's another one I usually try and wait on. But for the most part, the rest of it, like the meat and cheese, again, they last quite a while, especially like I was mentioning earlier, when you're cutting it, it'll last a little less longer, but that's still like it's going to last at least a month. That's the great thing about cheese, is it does not go bad quickly. So good question. What else?
I have another one if no one else has one. How do you, if you go to a party and someone has a charcuterie board, how do you eat it nicely? Because like, I know there's little bits, like, do you use a toothpick? Like mine comes with a little cheese knife thing. Do you stab it with the cheese knife? How do you do that?
Yeah, so toothpicks are great. If you've got toothpicks, I usually, when like we distribute boards and give boards to people, they're little like fork type things. So they're like the size of toothpicks, but they've got 2 prongs on them. Another one is just going to be like really small spoons that are always nice for like throwing these in the pickles or in the jam, or even in the olives, or whichever one. The thing that sucks about charcuterie boards, they're a beautiful aesthetic, but they're really not supposed to look pretty once you start eating them. You're supposed to make them, take your picture, and then move on and eat all the goodness. But yeah, I usually, especially with the times that we're living in now, if I'm serving a board, I usually just put toothpicks to the side rather than putting them all on one, or putting a toothpick in each of them. That way people can have their own toothpick and they're not kind of mixing things up, or especially from like an allergy standpoint. Most people are pretty self-aware of those, but sometimes it's nice to just have your own. Tongs are always great. So again, it's hard to keep it pretty, unfortunately, but everybody loves it, because that's kind of the goal, right? Is to look at it once, say, this is beautiful, now time to eat it all. So those knives that you get maybe with your boards are going to be helpful for those softer cheeses. So with your brie or your blue cheese, if people are going to be kind of smearing it a little bit, then they can utilize that. Some people, they don't even want to cut the goat cheese. They just want to put that whole log on a board, which is totally cool too. But it is going to be one of those soft cheeses. So you have the ability to just stick your knife in it, and people can kind of cut off however much they want, or just take half pieces or whatever. So that's a little easier for those utensils as well.
Could you repeat what you suggest is the amount to plan for the cheese and the meat?
Yeah, for sure. Let me I'm going to grab something. Oh, no, I don't have it up here. But I can email it. That way you guys can have that out as well. But I usually say it's like 2, I think I actually said it backwards earlier, so that's probably a good thing. It's usually 2 to 3 ounces of meat per person, and then 3 to 4 ounces of cheese per person. And again, that can vary based off of if you are eating it for a full meal, or if you're just using it as an appetizer or a snack. I will say, when you're building a board, the toughest part is shopping, which I don't know if any of you felt that way when you were out shopping and trying to get your stuff, but that, in my opinion, is the hardest part, because you're trying to, you want to buy all the cheeses, right? You want to try everything, and then you get them all and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even have room for all of these. Like, there is not enough space in the world for this. So I usually try, if it's just like myself and my husband eating, we're going to do just one meat, so the salami, which really goes with anything, and 2 to 3 cheeses. And then once you start adding to those amount of people you're serving, so like then the next one, if it's going to be like 4 to 6 people, I'm going to do 2 meats and 3 to 4 cheeses, just kind of depending on the size of the group. But that way there's a little bit of variety that you can offer, but you're also not overwhelming people or overwhelming yourself when you're at the store and looking at like, oh my gosh, there's so many cheese options. Where do I even begin? And like I said, I'll make sure I've got another paper that I can email out, and I'll make sure I get that to Casey and Becky. That way you guys got it. Sorry, Casey, I think I interrupted you.
No, it didn't look like there was any other questions. So thank you so much. This was very fun end to our workshop, and thank you everyone for coming today. We had a fantastic turnout. And like I mentioned earlier, we will get the CEUs emailed out once we get approval from CDR. So thank you everyone for attending. And like we mentioned, we have spots open. We can definitely have co-chairs. So please feel free to contact myself or Becky if you are interested.
Or our President-elect Patty Dollarhide is looking to fill those positions as well. So you can contact her.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate you letting me hop on, and hope it was fun and we all learned something.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
That's my supper.
You want to end the recording? Do we need to end the recording, Becky?
Oh.